Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. Today is the stream I honestly didn't plan on making. I just got off the train, just unpacked at home, and actually wanted to sleep before work tomorrow. However, I did not expect to get Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra versus iPhone 16 Pro Max comparisons in the very week where the Galaxy was just announced. I expected it to start right on Monday or Tuesday, so tomorrow or the day after that. But alas, it's been now 2 days of people us bombarding people with early coverage and especially camera comparisons. So when it comes to full reviews, I'm not sure if they're still embargoed or if people are just choosing to not yet publish them. I'm tending to go with the former because usually knowing content creators, they tend to do the later if they can. However, we do have two big camera comparisons already. One of them is a little bit more milquetoast. The SuperSaf reviews have been pretty safe in the last couple of years. I have criticized some of his methodology in the past. The fact that I don't think he always has enough pictures for us to actually look at and things like that. But genuinely, I don't have many issues with SuperSaf. Now, there's also the camera comparison by Mrwhosetheboss. And I actually swear to God, hand on the heart, whatever else, I have not watched that video. I think it only launched like a few hours ago or something like that. I just downloaded it. And my prediction is the Galaxy S25 Ultra is going to win simply because that's kind of what Mrwhosetheboss does, right? Like 1 year the iPhone wins, and then the next cycle the Galaxy wins, and on, and therefore he does not actually go against a specific fan base. He will just say, oh, you know what, the Galaxy that is a few months more modern than the iPhone, oh, it actually wins against that now slightly older iPhone, right? But then a new iPhone comes out half a year after the Galaxy, and now, well, the iPhone is more modern, so the iPhone can afford to win. I actually looked now into a few spec points here for the Galaxy S25 Ultra. It's not super duper important, but I do find it interesting, primarily because a lot of specs are pretty much unchanged over the previous years, which is also what has happened with the iPhone 16 Pro Max. So the comparison should actually work pretty similarly to how the iPhone 15 Pro Max compared to the S24 Ultra. So basically, they're relying mostly on boosts by the image signal processor on the chip. Now, we do still have the same 200 megapixel f1.7 aperture, 24 millimeter wide camera with a 1 by 1.3 inch sensor. Ignore that very small micron sized pixels, 0.6. That's because obviously it has a lot of pixels. Now, the default shooting mode for the S25 Ultra is still 12 megapixels. From what I hear, it's a bit faster. It's shooting 50 megapixels than previous generations, so that makes this mode more usable and a little bit more in line with just how fast and reliable Apple's 48 megapixel mode is. The 200 megapixel mode is still only for incredible bright scenarios, if you can really afford to maybe hold your phone a little longer. So it's not really the way Samsung wants you to shoot, but they allow you to. The 3x telephoto 10 megapixel camera is entirely unchanged. That brings us now into year 4 or 5 with a 1 by 3.52 inch sensor. So the only sensor that is not only small, but it's legitimately bad because it's an ancient sensor. Even Samsung's mid-range devices get some random 40, 50, 60 megapixel shooter, yet here their flagship has one 10 megapixel camera. Usually when you find a spec like that, you kind of almost expect it to be the depth sensor or a dedicated macro mode camera, right? So incredibly niche, much cheaper solutions, basically designed just to have an extra camera for the spec sheet. And that's kind of what the 10 megapixel camera at this point feels like, because it's no image signal processor in the world will at some point compensate just how outdated sophisticated this sensor is getting, and obviously its optics are inferior to the other systems as well. We also keep the 5x telephoto camera. Should be noted that Apple's 5x zoom is at 120 millimeters, while Samsung is at 111. So Apple zooms actually in a little bit further. Samsung does have the larger sensor at a 1 by 2.52 aperture. Apple's is around 1 by 3 inches, so actually quite a big difference. But we do have also a noticeable, like less bright aperture on the Samsung side with an f3 by 0.4 solution, while the iPhone is at f2.8, if I'm not mistaken. And then the ultra-wide camera, this is where, in my opinion, Samsung has legitimately the better solution across the board from Apple. It's a high-resolution sensor, yes, and Apple just upgraded the 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max to a 48-megapixel ultra-wide. However, this is a larger sensor, judging by the 1.7 micrometer advertised pixel size. I'm inclined to believe that this is the exact same sensor, almost like on what's on the telephoto. So Apple's is around 1 by 2.7, and Samsung's would then be 1 by 2.52. But unlike the telephoto camera, where Samsung's larger sensor is being somewhat held back by a worse aperture, here in the ultra-wide, Samsung actually does offer you a better aperture as well. Apple's is at f2.2 versus Samsung's f.9. It should be noted to anybody who's like really big into photography and stuff like that, you will know a wider aperture does not necessarily mean better in every scenario. But when we are looking at very small sensors, very small optical systems on smartphones, usually the larger the aperture, the better. We've seen Apple even go to like f1.5 on the iPhone 13 Pro Max, for example, but then go back to on that for the main camera and keep to an f1.8 aperture. We've seen Samsung offer variable aperture. We've seen some other companies do that. We've also seen companies offer variable zoom ranges like Sony at this point. We've also seen companies like Vivo pair their telephoto solutions, even though they are not maybe as optically advanced as Samsung's or Apple's. But they pair them with much larger sensors. Like instead of a 1 by 2.5 or even a 1 by 3 inch solution, they have like a 1 by 1.4 inch solution. So basically almost the same size as Samsung's or Apple's main wide cameras. So that's just the context for the spec sheets here. So in my opinion, there is nothing except the ultra wide that I believe Samsung wins by default just from the hardware they use. With the telephoto, I'm still inclined to believe Samsung should dramatically win in good lighting conditions, but then lose out in poor lighting conditions. Samsung does give you the benefit of an extra 10 megapixel shooter at 3x zoom. That will give you a natural bokeh depth of field effect for portrait shots, for example. But in most scenarios, I really would not recommend doing anything with such a small sensor, and probably relying just on a zoom from the main, much larger sensor might work out better for most people. And yeah, when it comes to the main shooter, Apple's is low resolution at 48 megapixels. They have very similar apertures. Apple's sensor is slightly larger. Apple has a superior optical image stabilizer. For videos, we usually know that Apple's image signal processors perform a little bit better, sometimes a lot. So the details will really, like, that's where the devil will be. Ben Vinny joined the chat saying, did you see most of Gemini's features are already on the Pixel phone? And S24 and S23, they do not have the integration with Samsung apps. But they do, like Gemini does have in-app actions. It just so happens that it does that for the Pixel, which does have equivalents to basically every Samsung app, right? Samsung Health and shit like that. And I would much rather just use those Google versions, which I know will always be in lockstep updated with the latest APIs, the latest versions of Gemini and stuff like that, right? Than hope that Samsung always pairs their shit nicely with Gemini. Also, like that 6 months Gemini premium, whatever subscription, just really rubs me the wrong way. Like, don't get me wrong, I get it. Like, Apple does give you sometimes like 3 free months of a subscription service or something like that. But 6 months just seems like in this very insulting territory in between, where it's not the full year, which you would most likely at least keep your phone for. It's also not a month or two, so it doesn't look quite as a trial. So yeah, again, this is very, very like nitpicky to a degree. By the way, I have no idea where the GSM Arena website is taking 1 terabyte and 16 gigs of RAM for here. I also have no idea where they're taking, I believe 25 watts wireless charging. I only see it at 15 watts. So this list is not perfect, but the camera list is, from what I understand, correct. Also, by the way, sorry I messed up. I missed a few early super chats and chats. Angelica, one of our MarkCheck Pro Max YouTube members, joining the chat, saying that I'm not having a boring weekend. Yeah, I definitely am not. I let everyone know that like this is basically a late night stream almost for me. It's close to 10 p.m. Early in the video. I told you I just got off the train. So yeah, it's definitely an exciting weekend. And Max Maximus joining with a €2.49 super chat, saying he will check out the video once reviews go live. So I guess he doesn't want to get spoiled here, which, given how I view that stuff, I almost agree. I really dislike it when one specific feature like gets coverage, but the rest cannot. Because I'm like, oh, so you want me to get excited about this specific thing, but not the rest? Yeah, it rubs me the wrong way too. So thank you for the super chat. To everyone else who's watching, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it out with anybody who you think might enjoy it. Comment. You guys see, I love interacting with a lively live chat, hearing your opinions, your agreements, your disagreements, your inputs. And of course, you can donate directly to the channel with super chats and super stickers. You can become a channel member. Shout out to Angelica, Max, Maximus, and Steve, who are MarkTech Pro Max supporters right here on YouTube. And you can also become a supporter on Patreon. Link for that is in the description for this channel. Also, as always, let me know if my audio and video quality is working all right for you. I will actually try to do at least 2 videos the coming week. Hopefully one right tomorrow. Depends. My plans are a little bit unclear there. I'm definitely taking the Tuesday off to meet a friend, and then maybe on Wednesday, and the rest will depend on when we are actually getting more coverage and more interesting coverage. And yeah, the selfie camera, that's pretty much unchanged now for a couple of generations. That's actually very disappointing to me, because I feel like it takes very little to dramatically bump up selfie camera quality and basically reach end game level stuff, right? Like if this was a 1 by 2.7 inch sensor, right? So similar to how large Apple's ultra wide sensor is. Let's say the aperture is a tiny bit larger, f2.0 or f1.9, right? I feel like it would be like 20-30% better, and that to me would take it in some situations from like to more than good enough to just be used. Obviously, selfies are already good enough in good lighting conditions. Some people vlog with them, so their video can be quite good. But I just feel like I don't need selfies to ever have like 1-inch sensors or whatever. But I just feel like not only are we getting very small sensors with inferior optical systems at this point, but we are also getting very old sensors at this point, right? So everything that we have learned over time is just simply not being applied to selfies. Yes, the new image signal processor comes along. Yes, a new HDR pipeline gets introduced. That's all cool, but if you have a sensor that is like slow in readout speeds, that doesn't have the best dynamic range by default, right? There is not really that much you can do except for potentially forcing it to like take twice as many individual images and then force the HDR pipeline to merge it all together. I just don't think that's a very good approach, and it takes up extra time, but the extra resources. process, and it can introduce like blur. Obviously, you cannot do the same thing for videos, and even if you did, you would probably introduce more problems to things like rolling shutter. So it's just really, really bad in my opinion. And that goes for Apple, Samsung, and even to a degree, I would argue, even though most Chinese brands have tried to introduce like bigger cameras across the boards, like your Xiaomi's, your Vivos, your Oppos. But with selfie cameras, I feel like very little is being done. And then with a lot of Chinese phones, you also have the downside that just the skin smoothing and the beautifying process on those phones is just so egregiously bad. At that point, you almost want to shoot raw photos on the selfie. But then if you shoot raw, now you're dealing with the very real limitations of smaller sensors, worse optical systems and stuff like that. So yeah, with selfies, even though I personally don't care about selfies that much, I feel like for a world that definitely cares about selfies, it just feels weird that we are not getting improvements. And my theory here actually has to do with the design of modern smartphones, which I actually think a lot of smartphones right now are trying to target at some point under display cameras. So what they do want to avoid is making this camera cutout a lot larger, right? And deal with the backlash of like, oh my God, you basically have a dynamic island, but without the dynamic island functionality. Apple wants at some point to at least trim down the dynamic island in size. So they probably are not really gearing towards making the camera system like twice as large. Even though, by the way, we are getting rumors that the new iPhones will have better selfie cameras, but I doubt that they are that much crazy better. Yeah, and I believe if this cutout was like larger, we would be getting better camera systems underneath. It's just that everybody wants this like almost perfect screen to body aspect ratio, so they compromise on that, which honestly, I don't think it's a good decision. Like, it wouldn't be that much larger, maybe like 10-15% larger per radius, so 20-25% larger in diameter. It's really not that bad in my opinion. Now, that being said, this about wraps up my introduction for the Galaxy S25 Ultra Camera system. We do have more Apple stuff to cover, but we won't be doing that today. Mark Gurman has given some new details on what to expect this year in his Power On newsletter, but nothing big, nothing game-changing. I do think it's absolutely fine to basically give this coming week of coverage to the Galaxy S25 Ultra for the most part. Now, I did want to stream on Thursday, but my stream was interrupted. I wanted to cover the initial reviews of the RTX 5090. Next week, we are getting reviews of the RTX 5080. So while I might not watch like full-on review videos for that, I would probably amidst other coverage, I would just go to like Notebook Check or a website like that and see how these cards perform versus each other and versus the previous generation. So if you're interested in that kind of coverage, then you can check it out. I'll let you know when it happens. But without further ado, let's actually get started with the SuperSaf camera comparison between the Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra and Apple's iPhone 16 Pro Max. Let me put this at a nice 1.15, which I have found works pretty well. This is a 1080p video, so whenever somebody will evaluate sharpness, I'll just rely on their opinions, unless what my eyes see, even in 1080p, greatly proves otherwise, right? I will give my opinions on both the actual photos, but also the methodology of both SuperSaf and Mrwhosetheboss. You can let me know if you agree with those criticisms or agreements or disagree. I know that SuperSaf does a little bit more milquetoast stuff, like he will basically say at the end, spoiler alert, that both are good and fine no matter which you choose. However, obviously, when it comes to individual shots, I will have to add my 2 cents. So let's get started.
Saf, you're on SuperSaf TV. Welcome to the SuperSaf style camera comparison. of the iPhone 16 Pro Max versus the brand new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra.
Okay, so the iPhone's audio was cleaner, though that probably depends a little bit on what mode they were set in. Samsung does have some similar audio tricks to what Apple has done, though during their live event, I actually pointed out that I was not terribly impressed by their demonstration. I don't know if the hardware inside the S25 Ultra features much better microphones. We know that the iPhone 16 Pro Max features larger microphones than the 15 Pro Max. So Apple's improvements to microphone quality is not purely a software algorithm. It's not purely based on the A18 chip. This is legitimately better hardware behind it.
Ultra. As always, we'll be looking at all aspects of the cameras. There will be chapters down below. Let's get to it. Now, as always, we're going to start off with photos from the primary cameras. And after taking hundreds of images from both cameras...
Yeah, there's like this. I mean, I guess it's an overcast day. I think he's from the UK, so that makes sense. I really don't like what's going on here. I feel like while the iPhone's image is soft here, this is very smeary and very oversaturated. I've been to England and no, I have not seen every single freaking building, but just looks like dirt brown. And I don't mean that there's no dirt here. That's obviously just not the stone here. I wonder if there's like just a little bit of over sharpening going on detail that just objectively didn't exist for the camera. And then, but like, I guess the sign was in focus, and that's in focus on both of them, right? Even the slightly off angle thing is in focus on both. Now, it should be noted, and I've already said it, despite the 200 megapixel main camera, Samsung does by default shoot in 12 megapixel, while the iPhone's 48 megapixel camera it shoots by default in 24 megapixels. Obviously, both phones give you options to shoot at their maximum output. Samsung introduces a 50 megapixel mode in between 12 and 200 megapixels. Apple gives you a lot of freedom between like JPEG and HEVC and Pro RAW, of course, which is my favorite way to shoot photos, which I still don't think are getting enough praise. Plus, while Samsung has introduced a lot of filters, which, by the way, that's the word they used for the S25 family, the iPhone noticeably does not feature that. Instead, it features something called photographic styles, which actually allows you to offset certain camera decisions basically on an algorithmic level. Like it adjusts stuff like contrast and warmth, basically as if you had access to the code. Not quite as deep, but much, much more than you have with a filter, which sits on top of a regular photo, while this basically changes the metadata of your actual frame.
They both take excellent photos as expected. I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but you'll generally find that the Samsung has more contrasty images.
Yeah, this is where I will also say, like, for the last couple of years, I would argue ever since the iPhone XS Max, which was like my first like modern iPhone, like I skipped the iPhone 10, and images got noticeably warm. But then the iPhone 11 took that up a notch. The images got a lot better, a lot sharper, better focus, everything. Obviously, the 11 Pro had 3 cameras for the first time, right? So I feel like people forgave Apple initially for having very warm, more saturated images. But over time, as basically as Google went away from their very cool look, as Samsung became a little bit more natural than they were before, people really started to notice that Apple is not like the neutral brand that they were before, right? Before that, I would argue you could really rely on the iPhone shooting very neutral images, very accurate images. But then after that, Apple's just like more advanced smart HDR pipeline was like very opinionated. Now you can compensate that these days with 2 things. First, with a Pro RAW image, which is much more neutral by default. It's not a raw image in that regard. It's not like a log file that you need to entirely color grade, but it does have a lot more data in it. So even if you don't like the end results still you have a lot more opportunity to change it afterwards. And with photographic styles, you can do that actually before. So if you're entirely happy with Apple's contrast, for example, with how they treat shadows and bright highlights, all you have to do is basically pick that square picker on the 16 Pro or the specific photographic styles on like the iPhone 15 series, right? And you basically have to adjust it to be a bit cooler by default. That's how I treat it. My contrast, I believe it's -5 or something like that, so it's basically unchanged, but then my images are tuned to be like -10, -15 cooler if I'm not shooting raw, which no, ProRes. ProRAW is the image format, ProRes is the video format. So there's a lot of versatility. Now Samsung does have Expert RAW, but Expert RAW is simply not as good as Pro RAW, and they've even stopped really talking about it that much. So you really have to hope that Samsung gives you a good default thing. And this is just a very, very saturated image. It's very warm. Not saying it's bad if you can, but I'm saying if you want the iPhone to look this way, you can get it to look this way. If you really want Samsung to look this way, it would be more of a filter that does not give you very gradual, very detailed editing options.
This is something you may or may not prefer. You can achieve a similar look with photographic styles on the iPhone. You can adjust this after the fact too. Now, Samsung does have some new filters and some adjustments that you can make, but it saves images as JPEGs, so things are baked in. You don't have as much information as the iPhone.
And just the colors here, right? Like, I understand there is a green tint, and Samsung probably corrected for like the grass or the moss even growing here. But I just feel like this image just looks way better. And again, the ability to make it more green if I really wanted to is there. I don't like it when a color takes over the entire image.
iPhone has with HEIF. Now, the iPhone does shoot by default at 24 megapixels. The Samsung shoots at 12 megapixels by default. So if you're going 100%, by default, you will get more detail on images from the iPhone. But of course, the Samsung has a higher resolution camera, 200 megapixels. And we have two stages, 50 and 200 megapixels. At 50 megapixels, if we compare it to the 48 megapixels on the iPhone, you can see that the Samsung is sharper thanks to that high resolution camera, and you can shoot at
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely don't deny it. I'm actually not sure if this is going to be true with the lighting conditions there are. Granted, this is like British fog, so it's actually not very dark if you've ever been like to the UK. Like, it still reflects some light from the sky basically all around you, makes everything look really flat. But I'm just looking at some of these things and I just don't see a ton of real detail here. Like, not to say this isn't sharper, it probably is, but it's definitely not a game-changing amount, and it definitely would not get me to shoot 200 megapixel photos on the Samsung. Also, I'm not sure if it's a focus thing, but just looking at the tree branches, it just looks all way better exposed and more better in focus on the iPhone. And again, I do have to question the color signs a little bit on the Samsung. I have to say, I actually praise the S25 Ultra for being relatively consistent, still a tiny bit too saturated. I feel like Samsung is going back to their old bag of tricks. Like, I'm not liking the color signs here. It's not bad. That's still way better than what like a highly opinionated like iPhone 10s, 11, 12 would shoot, right? But it's just not like in an era where Apple just gives you so much versatility to change it. I'm just not a big fan.
All the way up to 200 megapixels, and this is going to give you that much more detail. Now, for low light, things were very close with the primary camera.
I mean, color balance, like, this is what I've been talking about. Like, one color takes over the entire image. That's what happened with the green moss. That's what happened with the dirt brown on the building. Samsung's algorithm seems very basic and not really differentiating between like how you would want a person to look, which again, this is not perfect, obviously there is a lack of light here, but like across the board, like the exposure, like Samsung has like these weird lights from here giving like an almost rainbowy look. Like this looks way better on the iPhone. Like this would be a like this was the kind of generational uplift that you saw like back from the iPhone XS, for example, to the iPhone 11 family.
The Samsung a bit more on the yellow side.
Again, this is not a bit more on the yellow side, and I promise you that the iPhone probably is here more warm than real life. I used an iPhone 15 Pro Max. I took a lot of photo on the 16 Pro Max, and I mean, like even the star in the sky, you can see that it's way better exposed. Like, what is going on with the Samsung image?
Here, and also when it did come to bright lights with contrast,
again, like this is completely, and it's not even to say, like it's not like this image got blown out, right? This isn't the kind of light that actually like hurt the camera. This is just processing. It saw a bright light, it basically decided, oh well, that means the image is bright. And like I would actually argue, if the, like for example the street here actually has a warm tone, probably the background might actually look better on the Galaxy. But look at how the iPhone captures like these lights, right? Versus how here it just paints everything as if like it's really a noticeable difference. And then simultaneously, not only does he himself look better, and then we can argue, well, does the actual like well, the iPhone's buildings here look better, but okay, let's say the street might look better. But then look at the sky, right? Both are noisy, but the iPhone's is way less noisy. So again, these are the kind of comparisons where I feel like a real photographer would just be screaming from the bloody rooftops of like, oh my God, this is a consistent 15 to 25% improvement, and I wouldn't want to miss it for the world. And here we are like, you know what? It's a little bit warmer in the Samsung. And by the way, he is like big on these black outfits, which I like. Guys, you see me, I'm always, almost always clothed in black like a freaking Sith. But like, look at the iPhone here, right? Actual black, like no like violet freaking shimmer. Now it could be that there was like a noticeable difference in the lighting from one image to the next somehow, but then that's just an error of his methodology.
Dark shadows in the background, then it did tend to overexpose, whereas the iPhone was much more balanced. Now in this example, which is extreme low light, we can even see the stars. The iPhone just has a much cleaner image compared to the Samsung.
And I almost wonder with some of the details that Samsung has created here, like what was the exact focus, right? Because clearly the iPhone just tried to capture the tree, right? But then still gave you a nicely exposed sky. This almost looks like a nightography image where you like an astrography thing. But then why is the sky so dirty, even though it does kind of expose for more individual stars? But then the tree looks garbage, right? Like, how does the iPhone get better for both? That's just not how it should work. My opinion is that Samsung was probably a little confused here.
Is quite noisy. But when we shoot indoors in low light, then the iPhone with that noise reduction is also applying that.
Yeah, this obviously is just a photo where the iPhone completely messed up. Quite honestly, this doesn't look like noise reduction to me. This looks like something that wasn't in proper focus and then noise reduced. So I would really question the methodology here. This is a question I always have with SuperSaf, to be honest. I wonder how many of the same image he takes. But as somebody who sometimes photographs like, I don't know, little gifts for my nieces and nephew, right? Like from close up. This is not a shot I get ever with my 15 Pro Max unless I mess up or the phone messes up and it's just simply not in focus, right? Either I click something to be in focus and then I move the camera a little weirdly so it loses it, or just messes up by itself. But I've never seen it in a comparison to a Samsung device just so thoroughly mess up. So again, I'm not actually given scores here, like 1 point here and there. I am really trying to also ascertain where the methodology could have failed each individual reviewer. And for example, for SuperSaf, when it comes to stuff like night mode or low light mode images, I just wonder if the phone, for example, like recommends this to be a night mode shot. Like I would just take it, right? But then I would tell people, oh, but maybe Samsung exposes this instantly, right? But the iPhone wants a 1 second night mode exposure. And when it comes to night mode direct comparisons, we'll get to that a little bit later on. Like, I want to know what the exposure time was, because obviously there's a massive usability difference if two images are identical, if I can capture that image in 2 seconds or 5 seconds. So those are just details that I would really like to know from the likes of SuperSaf. Maybe it's a little bit more of my medical/scientific background where I really like to know the methodology, but yeah, that's just how I work.
That to this Teddy, or maybe because it's just an Android. But if you look at the Samsung, it's maintained the textures of this Android plush a lot better compared to the iPhone. So pretty close for the primary cameras. Now,
no, it really wasn't, but okay.
Let's look at the ultra-wide cameras. Now, both, again, great ultra-wide cameras. The Samsung, once again, with that extra contrast. Now, in this example, I think it's a bit too much, whereas the iPhone might seem a bit too flat to many.
Again, you can so easily adjust it, so why not do it by default almost? Photographic styles do not change like a JPEG, so you can actually use it and you can tell people you can easily use it. It's a very easy to use like user interface and stuff like that. I do actually agree that the iPhone might be a little bit too flat here, though looking at the sky and seeing that it's a little bit cleaner too. I wonder if the iPhone maybe almost focused a little bit more in the sky.
Once again, you can use those photographic styles. This shot is very similar for both images. In this example, I do prefer the dynamic range overall on the Samsung. If you look at...
Really? I feel like they're very, very close. Like, wait, no, look. The sky here is more blown out than like the sun specifically. Right? Am I wrong here? Where's the dynamic is the dynamic range that he's talking about, like that this part is brighter even though it's like objectively probably this dark? I mean, this is in shadow. Like, I don't think this is a big enough. I would give this a total tie. I like the background on the iPhone more. Yeah, I could give the Samsung a little bit more for the foreground here, but like, let me know about the detail. I would find that much more interesting, given that Samsung has here a larger sensor going on with a wider, brighter aperture.
Look at the shadow areas. Those have been maintained better on Samsung. But when we go to the maximum resolution for both devices, then you do lose some dynamic range on the Samsung.
Yeah, I feel like that's also universally true for Samsung. This is why I feel like Apple's 48 megapixel modes are actually very comparable to their 12 megapixels. But I would also give Samsung a little bit on the sharpness here. I wish he zoomed in so I could see if it's actually more detailed. Mr. George Best, prefer the left photo, to be honest. Clouds look less blown out. Yeah, now especially, but I agree with that. And less bluish, which corresponds to our depressing weather. Oh my God. Shout out to the great people of the United Kingdom. But yeah, you do have crap-ass weather over there. By the way, good evening, Mark. Hope you're doing well. Thank you, Mr. George Best. Haven't seen you in a while. Yeah, I am doing fine. I am very busy in my state of life, and I've been on a weight loss journey and everything like that. I've lost almost like 35 pounds or something like that. So I am usually very tired, and I apologize for not having streamed as much as I used to. But yeah, life just comes at you in waves sometimes.
Here you can see in the background the highlights have been blown out. Both devices do shoot great macro shots, as you can see.
I like this macro shot more in the Samsung.
But with the iPhone, you can focus in closer, which is
yeah, obviously. I guess that also would explain why the Samsung could be sharper around here. So they did focus on slightly different things, though I would argue the iPhone somehow still actually came closer to focusing on this. Like, is it me, or does it feel like the texture that Samsung is doing here is just over sharpened? And they're like, look, don't get me wrong, I feel like Samsung actually has a good amount of detail here for the grass, right? But I feel like this little, what is it? Is it like a button or whatever, right? Like, does it feel like this texture is like almost like AI generated in comparison to the iPhone? The iPhone just feels very natural. I can almost see like the little shadows from where the fabric like is not like completely on one plane and one part is over the other. That being said, I don't like either image that much, to be honest. I would probably give neither the point here.
Advantage. Now, ultra-wide camera in low light. This
is where just the HDR pipeline comes into play. What Samsung is doing to the sky here, in my opinion, is absolutely unforgivable. But the image is sharper. It looks like he is sharper. But Samsung does achieve that by just killing, in my opinion, like shadows to an unforgivable degree. And that's a lot of criticism, given that the iPhone already does kill shadows to a bad degree. So while the iPhone still does maintain the better colors here, the better blacks, and the better sky, and a better contrast, I feel like he himself, maybe he will zoom in and then it will be easier for me to tell. I feel like his face looks a little bit more pleasing and definitely sharper. But again, I cannot zoom in like crazy. Even if this was a 4K file, it just wouldn't be the same. I need to rely on him doing the zooming.
Something that I mentioned in my previous camera comparison as well. The iPhone does seem to be very soft.
Oh, Jesus. Yes, the iPhone is very soft. This is a win for the Samsung. This is where you can actually feel the larger sensor, the wider aperture. The iPhone here messed up the sky entirely. You have no detail over there. I almost wonder what the iPhone's focus was in that image. I think this did not allow the iPhone to do night mode, which again, you probably would want to use it on both. And while neither image is very usable for me, it is a definitive advantage for the Samsung. So my predictions on Samsung having the low light superior ultra wide camera is definitely turning out to be mostly correct.
If we go in 100% to this image, you can see that.
That being said, there isn't actually that much crazy extra detail on the Samsung. Like, I guess you can see it even in like the shoelaces that it obviously looks better than the iPhone, but a lot of it this here is still not a very sharp image. So ultra wides just remain like a tertiary focus for companies.
The details are much sharper on me on the Samsung compared to the iPhone. And once again, in this image as well.
And but again, this is where now Samsung did very weird exposure over here. That's the kind of lens problems, right? What is that J.J. Abrams effect called? Lens glare? Lens flare, I think, right? This is what iPhones are usually criticized for. Not only do you have like the objectively large like light, but you even have like the rainbow breakup here, right? And the completely just yellow tone here just proves that the HDR pipeline is completely failing just to get whatever detail it can, while the iPhone just gives up on the detail here on the floor. This is a scenario where both shots absolutely needed to be in night mode. However, for the 100 times better color reproduction, I will give the slight win to the iPhone here, though I don't like either image.
The Samsung
and again, you can also see the iPhone here actually does the much smarter thing with the sky, and it basically tries to not expose it at all. It keeps it dark and very contrasty, while Samsung still tries to expose something up there and just messes it up entirely.
It's much sharper and a much more pleasing image compared to the iPhone.
It's really not. Like, come on, color accuracy matters for something. Like, this is not what these buildings look.
Now let's test out the zoom. So both devices do have 2x zoom, which crops into the middle part of the main sensor, and results are quite similar. But when you get to 3x zoom, then the dedicated optical 3x zoom camera of the Samsung kicks in. And as you can see from this,
yeah, I mean, in this specific scenario, it's probably a bit sharper. Would I give up for the would I want a 3x telephoto like that on the iPhone? Not really. Not interested in paying more or giving up internal space. It just doesn't do enough over the main sensor, in my opinion, and it's also not something that you can do at all in low light. So why bother? Mr. George Best, what I like about iPhone nighttime photography is that it doesn't make it look like a morning shot. By blowing up everything, it respects the fact that it's a night photo, so it keeps a darker image. Exactly. I feel like when Google actually introduced night photography on, what was it, the Pixel 2? They were really far ahead. It took like Apple 2 gens to catch up or something like that. I feel like they actually tried doing a lot of it, but I also understand that we're working with very small sensors back in the day. The ISP was still not very fast, right? So I can forgive some obvious shortcomings back in the day. But now that we actually have large sensors, we actually have very fast ISPs, we have pixel binning and all that algorithmic fun. I feel like it's almost unforgivable to just have night photos that just end up looking completely overexposed, right? Because you can use any camera, no matter how dumb its algorithm, just let it expose for basically a few seconds and you have a brighter image. But that image will usually not be very aesthetically pleasing. And I feel like Apple really goes for an aesthetically pleasing and natural, or at least naturalistic night mode. I feel like Samsung is not bad. I feel like Google has kind of been back and forth. They lost definitely their initial lead, but they still do it quite well. Yeah, but Samsung, while not terrible, especially on the Ultra models, I feel like their regular models do tend to have real issues with those outdated 50 megapixel sensors on there. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see.
This example, it does give you sharper results. And this is going to carry on all the way up to around 4.9 times because the Samsung is using the 3x camera going up to 4.9 times. The iPhone is using the 1x zoom camera and going all the way up to 4.9 times. When we hit 5 times...
This is where I would actually argue that the iPhone does deserve variable zoom. It's a technology that Sony has. I feel like that the main sensor, given that it's most likely always to be the largest, I don't see Apple introducing like 1 by 1.4 inch telephoto cameras. I feel like if Apple gives you a 1 inch, almost 1 inch, either a full 1 inches or 1 by 1.4 or something like that for the main camera, and then they give you like a 1 by, let's say, a full 2 inches, right? 1 by 2, roughly half the size of the iPhone, of the main sensor. But then that sensor for telephoto is actually variable. And let's say it can zoom you in from 3x to 6x. I feel like that's almost end game stuff because yes, sure, you could make that sensor at some point a full 1 inch, but now you do have to really fight with aesthetics, like the camera lenses and bumps will start getting ridiculous. You are competing with internal space, with other components like batteries. And again, I feel like we are not too far away from that, but Apple is trying to hold off from that. So, because once they do it, then these generational uplifts will just go down to like the 2-3% range, where every year it's going to be like, oh, the ISP is a little better, which tuned the HDR pipeline a little bit. But those are not going to be huge changes from that point on.
Zoom, then both of the optical zoom cameras kick in and both provide very good sharp results. But when we extend the zoom, so if we go to 10 times, for example, you'll notice that Samsung's processing starts kicking in and it gives you much sharper results.
Yeah, I really don't care about it. I never take 10x images. I would argue there's a lot of fake detail. You can see that on the grass. Like, that's not really how cameras work. They don't really like capturing detail everywhere and all at once. This is basically a sharpening algorithm. It's a good one, don't get me wrong, but it's not really something I care about. As long as I can objectively read it for utility perspective, then yeah, it's cool. But I never take an image to have like a sign from 10, 15x away be in focus. That's just not what ever I care about.
This is especially noticeable when you get to around 20.
Yeah, you can see like the lines are way too smooth. Like his face, you can see there's a lot of smoothing over there. Not to say that there is great detail on the iPhone, and there are some things here that are objectively better done, like I would argue the background, but it's not something I care about.
25.
And also, of course, this is partially also the help of a larger sensor, definitely, because while it does have a worse quote-unquote aperture, it will not matter as much in good lighting
times,
conditions.
which is the maximum on the iPhone. And yes, there is some artificial sharpening happening on the Samsung, but I kind of like it. On the Samsung, you can go up to 100 times and...
Yeah, you can basically see this is basically drawn on. This is not real data. Like somehow this text is literally 10x sharper than anything else you see in the image.
I mean, that is totally not real. Like, this is some serious processing happening. But nevertheless, when it comes to extended zoom on the Samsung, you do have an advantage. Now, to quickly remind you, if you're enjoying this video so far, do consider subscribing and hit that bell icon. These camera
do the same here.
Comparisons take forever to do. Me and the team have been working forever. I've lost count of the hours and the amount of sleep that we've missed. But if you do like these camera comparisons and you want to see more, then do consider subscribing. Now, what about low light zoom? Well, at 3 times, once again, that optical...
This is where the benefit later will come in for the iPhone's sensor shift optical image stabilizer. It does help with their main camera. You've seen it in low light. I don't know why he insisted on basically claiming that these cameras are so close in low light, like the main ones. They really are not, especially with anything that needs a lot of stabilizing. Now, the 3x does give you a different perspective than the iPhone's 1x. Usually that will mean worse. This is a low light scenario where there's actually a lot of light still. But it's more interesting what happens with the 5x, because I would argue this is a scenario that was basically entirely made for 5x.
Zoom quality of the Samsung is going to beat that digital zoom on the iPhone. But when we get to 5 times, things start getting interesting. We have the 5 times optical zoom cameras on both devices. But
yeah, and this is where you will see that all these fancy sharpening tricks, the ones that basically wrote the text manually onto the thing again, you can see there is no comparison in who has more detail, right? And this is a 12 megapixel, way smaller sensor, but its benefits in larger aperture, Apple specific HDR pipeline, but I would argue much more importantly, the sensor shift image stabilizer that allows you to aggregate a lot of light while keeping everything in focus in a short amount of time. With Samsung, you probably would want to use a gimbal here. Yeah, this is a huge advantage.
But the iPhone has a brighter image with less artifacts. If
I mean,
you go
it's
to 10
also
times,
sharper.
there is a difference in focal length. I don't know, they call them both 10 times.
I mean, like also like detail. Look at like you can see with his trousers that his pockets are actually like 3-dimensional, not drawn on. You can see that the fabric where it just like creates some imperfections. This one, like it almost like where there's a little shadow, right, coming up from his knee. Like there's darkness here. Looks like he wet his freaking pants. And you can see that correcting for shapes is almost impossible. Like, to give him a compliment, right? He seems to have nicely trained legs, right? But he also has something bulging out of his pants. And no, I'm not making a dirty joke. He has something in his pocket. And I just feel like Samsung almost drew that as if there's like, this is just his leg, right? And that's just like the muscle group there. And as somebody who knows how the muscles there work. Like this would be an incredibly weird genetical anomaly.
But they've got slightly different focal lengths. You can see this a little bit more clearly.
Yeah, also, by the way, the iPhone does zoom in a little bit further. At 5x, the iPhone zooms in 120 millimeters, while Samsung is 111, which technically is more like 4.5, 4.6 versus its main camera. It doesn't really matter. But yeah, the iPhone does have advantages here.
Especially if you look at the branches behind me, they've all become a bit of a blur on the Samsung, whereas the iPhone is maintaining that better. Going up to 25 times, once again, there's a lot of processing.
Yeah, you can see that Samsung just said, you know what we're gonna say from this image that clearly features a person? This text.
Happening on my face on the Samsung, whereas we do have a cleaner image on the iPhone. So although that processing might be beneficial in... although that processing...
I know how you feel, brother. That's why I do live streams, because nobody expects me to get everything perfectly. If they did, I would probably kill myself in Minecraft. Yeah, I understand. If you want to produce these like highly sleek videos, you probably are like better off like recording everything 10 times, unfortunately.
Oh my
That's
God.
why I don't make pre-recorded videos anymore.
How many times I'll say that? So although that processing goes in Samsung's favor when we are using extended zoom in good light, this is not the case for extended zoom in low light. Now, what about portraits? Both of these take excellent portraits. Look at the edge detection here. They've both picked up the area between my arms, and we've got a very complicated background, but this doesn't seem to be an issue.
Yeah, the colors are better on the iPhone, though both images are aesthetically pleasing. I could take either one and be perfectly fine with it.
For either of these. Now, the next step that we can go to in portraits is 2x, and both of these seem to be...
And this is way better on the iPhone now a little bit, and that has to do with that Apple's 24 megapixel output actually like is optimized right at 1x, right at 2x. You just go to 1/4 of the image, and then the algorithm actually is optimized to just take a nice 12 megapixel image. While Samsung does have to do some slightly less mathematically perfect pixel binning. So while neither image is perfect, I would argue the iPhone is way better here.
Doing really well. The Samsung has a brighter image with brighter...
Yeah, but like your face just has a very orangish look, which I know some people prefer just having warmer skin tones. And there is a little bit of gray here on the iPhone that might not match his skin tone perfectly, but it's way better than this.
Shadows, but the blacks have been better maintained on the iPhone.
This is not like freaking racism or whatever.
So
right?
although that...
Like look, the way he even exposes for himself, he does not give himself that warm skin tone. Like it's clearly not something like a more professional camera solution wants to do. Would be nice to have a picture captured by a DSLR. Yeah, especially like just capture freaking raw image, right? Like because DSLRs and JPEG modes are still opinionated. I mean, there are literally dozens of modes sometimes to choose from. But I'm just also saying that after years of having seen videos from him, right, I reacted to countless of these comparison videos at this point as well. I have heard him say what kind of like skin tone he prefers. So I'm just trying to extrapolate from all that.
Brighter shadows, but the blacks have been better maintained on the iPhone. Now remember, the Samsung does have that dedicated 3x optical.
And there is almost no advantage here, right? Like what, like is it tiny bit sharper? Maybe, but you can see like not really. Like it's a small sensor with a bad aperture. It's an old sensor. It does all the same stuff with the skin. Yeah, like you can see how pink his lips are here, right? Like, nah.
Zoom camera. And when we use this...
You can see also, by the way, how smooth his skin is. You can see that there's a little bit of detail here, which I would argue in the 2x mode, right? The smoothing is even, okay? I hope you'll get what I mean, right? But when it comes to the 3x mode, like his cheeks became almost entirely like washed out.
pleasing portraits on the Samsung. They're sharper with more detail compared to the iPhone. But my favorite focal length for portraits on smartphones now is 5 times.
I agree.
And here, once again, look at how good both of these are in terms of edge detection. The Samsung
iPhone doing a banger job, by the way, capturing like individual droplets in flight. Not everyone might want it. I am absolutely sick for that look. I love the basically instant shutter in that regard on the iPhone. Also, just in general, the contrast is better. The skin tones are once again better on the iPhone. It's not a monumental difference. Like when we looked at those night mode photos, not night mode photos, those night photos where that building was white on the iPhone and like yellow, completely piss yellow on the Samsung. I was like, why are you not giving the iPhone the bigger advantage here? Here, I would argue there is an advantage to me for the iPhone. It's just not a huge one.
It has boosted the shadows, which is making me look a little bit more gray, but that's fine. I think both are still doing really good. And I absolutely love this shot. I think this is such a good example of how well both of these are doing. It's raining so much, but just look at the edge detection on both of these. They've even picked up that little flap on my umbrella. Now, looking at the shots, I do prefer the Samsung overall. It's a sharp.
Okay, we have very different tastes.
Image, and it looks cleaner compared to the iPhone. So excellent portraits from both devices, but the Samsung does get the advantage with...
I really hope Apple just makes their telephoto sensor a little bit larger this year. And then it just takes away like these weird comparisons where Samsung is worse in contrast, in color, in instant capture, often in edge detection, though these scenarios were not that difficult to got the edge detection right, but then it's tiny bit sharper and it's like, yeah, so
that 3 times optical zoom. Right, now for selfies, I think both take excellent selfies. You do get...
I just cannot be a friend to these like color tones. You can see here the same effect where the green that is like the grass and a little bit of the moss here, it just looks like everything is covered in moss. That's not how this looks in real life.
A wider field of view with the iPhone, although I do prefer the colors generally on the Samsung.
I prefer the contrast, like the black is better on Samsung.
You can see the black on my jumper has been maintained better, and the iPhone does tend to go for a bit of a bluey look, I found.
Yeah, I don't like either image. Like, the iPhone makes him look now too gray, but Samsung just goes for an orangish skin tone here. That's not how he looks.
You can see my skin tones are much better on the Samsung here.
No, they're not. Like, they're more pleasing in this very basic way, but across the board, the iPhone, like both of those images are actually pretty bad and unpleasing in my opinion.
Although the iPhone does have better dynamic range, it's maintained those highlights in the background compared to the Samsung. Now, for selfie portraits, I think both do excellent. They've got great edge detection. And for low light selfies, if you do take...
Yeah, this is where I would argue, once again, we're hitting scenarios where both are so bad, I would just use neither. And at that point, it's completely irrelevant which one wins.
Selfie with the night mode, it's very difficult to keep your hand still. As you can see in this example, the iPhone is doing better. The Samsung is giving a bit of a blurry mess. Using the front-facing selfie flash on both devices, I prefer the Samsung here compared to the iPhone. Now, before we talk about video, we need to talk about some of the new AI features. So we've got cleanup on the iPhone, which will let you remove objects and things from your images. And then we've got generative edit on the Samsung. Now, comparing these side by side, the iPhone is way quicker and does not need an internet connection, but the Samsung produces much better results. You can see here.
I mean, this looks like water at this point, but yeah, I agree. In this specific scenario, the iPhone did mess up. I would like to know if that generative fill was cloud-based or on-device based, but yeah. Also, by the way, this is one of the few images where I genuinely do prefer his skin tone on the Samsung, so it's ironic that it takes one of the AI photos. Now, the grass still looks trash on the Samsung. It's just, this color is... yeah, like it's an image more pleasing on the Samsung. He should have presented it in the regular camera comparison.
That the Samsung has filled in the tree nicely, whereas that's kind of been cut off on the iPhone. And although this does take a little bit more time, I would prefer that and have a better result. The Samsung also has sketch to image, which is...
I don't care. I can do that on the web with a billion ChatGPT wrappers at this point.
Really nice feature. You can add things like a cat to your image very quickly and easily.
That's a dog, but okay.
On it. This is something that you don't have available on the iPhone. Right, now let's take a look at video. Usually this is an easy win for the iPhone, but Samsung has actually done a great job this year. At 4K 30 frames a second in good light, things are very, very close. It was very difficult to pick a winner between these two. And the Samsung now has 10-bit HDR, which is switched on by default. And it also has a very easy way to export that HDR video to SDR video, so it's viewable on all devices. Now, of course, because this video is exported in SDR, I've had to get those HDR videos and then export them in SDR, and both do really, really well. Once again, it's so difficult to pick a winner between these two. Now, for low light video, again, things are very, very close.
No, they're not actually, but okay.
I would say that the iPhone is better in extreme low light, but the Samsung has 8K video now, not only from the primary camera, but also from the ultra wide as well as the 5x telephoto camera. And looking at this example, check out how much more detail that you get on the Samsung with.
I'm checking that the frame rate on the Samsung is wobbly.
8K video, especially if you
what did you do?
And because of the new 50 megapixel ultra wide camera on the Samsung, you can also
by the way, like, nice exposure for the sky here for the Samsung. I feel like that is way more worth praising than the 8K stuff.
8K with the ultra wide camera, once again, lots of detail. It's not as wide.
Also, again, by the way, like, ProRes shooting on the iPhone, log shooting on both, but obviously the iPhone supporting ProRes log. Just the versatility if you actually care about highest end production. And by the way, look at what where the iPhone messes up here, actually. The iPhone does exactly what I disliked about the Samsung, which is the iPhone did aggregate the green from the entire image, like from the moss, the grass, and transposed it to everything else. While Samsung now in their video recording, actually is more natural than in their photos.
This is the iPhone, but you do have the advantage of 8K. However, when we go to low light with the ultra wide camera, then the Samsung was very jittery. Check this out.
Yeah, it feels like it just does a lot of image aggregation to get to some sharpness level, while the iPhone just manages to have every frame well focused, well lit, well exposed. It's just the ISP is clearly a bit better here.
When I was walking, it was just all over the place, which I didn't like. So for low light, I definitely prefer the iPhone. Now for the zoom cameras, at 5x zoom in good light, both do really well. But when we get to low light, then the S25 Ultra has less noise. And this is something that you can see very clearly in this example. Now for the front-facing camera, 4K, even with HDR, was very, very close. However,
it's funny, now the iPhone does a little bit too much orange. I have to say, in this specific scenarios, Samsung is basically like I feel like Samsung has won like 20, maybe 25 comparisons of photo shoots, but with videos, it's like closer to 35, 40. There have been multiple examples. Yes, the iPhone is way sharper, more stable in this case, but I would argue that Samsung does get the colors a bit more right in video.
The iPhone is wider, and when it came to cinematic video...
Yeah, both are terrible, but the iPhone is better, and the iPhone lets you edit it, which makes them actually usable. I would still not use them. I do believe it will probably take until like the 17 Pro Max for actually make those usable, and the iPhone is clearly superior here. But yeah, I don't care about
portrait
cinematic
video from the selfie cameras. Then you had much better dynamic range on the iPhone. And speaking of cinematic video, as you saw from the start of this video, the iPhone is still king of cinematic video.
That's
it's sharper,
true.
has better overall edges.
It's still not necessary,
if you do pause
but
the video
it's
at
true.
any point and zoom in, and especially if you look at my beard, the iPhone is way sharper compared to the Samsung. This is something that we also had on the S24 Ultra. You can also edit the amount of blur and the point of focus on the iPhone after the fact. You can't do this on the S25 Ultra. Now for stabilization, things were pretty tricky. They were both similar at 4K.
And this is where you will see somehow now the iPhone, with everything a little bit more in focus, it feels like now it gives you way better colors on the building,
I would say. But when I try to use action mode versus super steady, the default is the ultra wide camera, and the Samsung for some reason just lost focus. I tried this.
My theory here is that it's probably because the ultra wide is actually the newest camera in here. It probably has the least optimized drivers right now. So Samsung is just messing up a little bit, but it's probably something they can fix easily with a software update.
Twice. And I
But
looked
then
at
the iPhone just also looks better in this
the
case.
camera first. When it had me in focus, as soon as I turned around, it lost focus for some reason. So I'm not sure why this is. And for that reason, I would give the stabilization win to the iPhone. Now, both devices can shoot in log video. So you can go in and grade after the fact. Both of these seem to do really well. But the S25 Ultra also has a Pro Photo and Pro Video mode where you can adjust things like your ISO and white balance. With the iPhone, you will need a third-party app to be able to do this.
I mean, Apple does have Final Cut Camera, which is not a third-party app, but I understand. There's also the DaVinci Resolve app, the Blackmagic app, which gives you a ton of video customization that is way superior to most integrated Pro modes. For photos, yes, you probably are way behind when it comes to default camera solution. But then you have solutions like Hellite on iPhone, which are way, way better than any integrated Pro mode. So again, pros and cons. A little bit of question between like spending extra money, working with a separate app. But if you are actually interested in pro stuff, why do you want to rely on the default stuff rather than something that actual like pros might have created with a lot of love? So take it as you will.
The Samsung, this is built in. Now for slow motion, I think both are actually very good. Both can do 4K 120 frames a second. And watching me jumping like a lunatic a few times, things are very similar. The Samsung can do 4K 120 FPS with the ultra wide camera. This is something that you can't do on the iPhone, but on the iPhone, you can do 4K 120 FPS at 2x. Now, both of these perform best with the primary cameras, if I'm honest. Now, for the audio, you had to listen at the start of this video, but we have some new AI features on both devices. We've got audio mix
Ducky
on
boy,
the iPhone.
are you reacting to Mr. Who's the Boss later? Yes, after we are finishing this, we are right moving on to Mr. Who's the Boss, because apparently I am crazy enough to be streaming until midnight right before going to work at 5:45 a.m.
Formats, in-frame, studio, cinematic. The Samsung has AI Audio Razor, which in my testing is very, very good. So have a listen to this comparison in a very noisy environment. All right, now let's try out the audio mix feature on the Audio Razor. There's a lot of noise in the background. There's some cars going. Let's see how much of that we made on the iPhone 16 Pro Max and Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra. I'm literally just talking, so we've got something to base this on.
Okay, the iPhone messed up here a bit.
Let's have a look. Now I tried.
But then
the
again,
different
that
modes
was
of audio
right
mix
when
on
the car
iPhone,
was
and
driving
that was the
by.
best that I could get. With the Samsung, just by tapping auto, you can get some amazing results. Yes, both of them do sound slightly artificial, but I would say that the sound is much better on the Samsung compared to the iPhone. So that—
Are you really basing this always on one comparison? Like, because the comparison you did in the very beginning here, somewhere you had like audio, right? Like it sounded way better on the iPhone, but now you have like this one clip. Like that's not how where's night mode photography, for crying out loud? Why is this test feel rushed?
has those photographic styles. Samsung, just by tapping auto, you can get some amazing results. Yes, both Samsung compared to the iPhone. So that is the SuperSaf style camera comparison between the iPhone 16 Pro Max and the Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra. I mean, to conclude, you can't go wrong with either of these. Both have some of the best.
Okay, yeah, we covered already the basic tech specs, the main advantages and disadvantages, with something like Apple's optical image stabilizer being better, stuff like Samsung's ultra wide camera being objectively larger and better and paired with a wider aperture, stuff where I definitely preferred iPhone's color image science, stuff where I actually was positively surprised by Samsung video image science. So I do think it's pretty clear where I land. I think the iPhone won this basically 60-40 across the board, which is very nice, obviously, if you're the earlier product that is actually cheaper. That being said, I do not think if you prefer Android that you should be switching to iPhone because of the camera. I do not think that the advantages are there. I think if you are completely neutral. I would, to most people, recommend an iPhone if you can afford it. And to people who like iPhones, obviously, doesn't matter, right? At that point, you are buying iPhones. And with Android, if you carry most about cameras, I would probably gear you more towards the direction of like a Vivo X200 Ultra that's about to come out, if money is like no issue. However, if you have preferences for something like One UI, especially now One UI 7, maybe you need the S Pen, even though it's downgraded. This is where, in my opinion, other preferences would greatly outweigh whether you see some stuff as wins for Samsung or losses. I just think that those other preferences matter more in general. Ducky Boy saying, I don't like iPhone, but even I would say the iPhone is way better at audio. Yeah, I feel like the problem is whenever you take one example, especially for something AI driven, you always give yourself the opportunity to just entirely mess up something specific. For example, when you look at PC rendering, right, there is stuff like DLSS and FSR, right, which are, DLSS is an AI-based upscaler. FSR, until FSR 3 point something, is basically an algorithm, and FSR 4 becomes an AI upscaler too, right? And when you look at those, DLSS in general is better, but FSR is not terrible, right? However, if you go to specific games that really need a more advanced AI-based upscaler that is very fast at reading vector data, predicting stuff in the image, very well tuned for complicated physics, like all particles throughout the image, and you take a game like Ratchet and Clank, Rift Apart, which is a fantastic game from Insomniac Studios, it will look like FSR 3.1 is almost like inferior to DLSS 2 rather than a competitor to DLSS 3, right? But because it's in this specific game, those specific algorithms versus AI's tech is way worse. This is why I don't like when reviewers take one piece of data. That just never works. It also has more mics, 4 on the iPhone versus 3 on the Samsung. That could depend a little bit on the specific use case. Whether or not you actually benefit from like the microphone more specifically designed for like your voice. Maybe you don't even want to use that simultaneously with the rest. But yeah, like, and when I mean your voice, I mean like while you're like holding it to your face. So you might just benefit more from focusing all the AI stuff on just the microphone on the back. But yeah, I do agree that the iPhone's hardware advantage is there here. But without further ado, we've been streaming for now well over an hour. Shout out for all of you to do the YouTube jazz again. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it out with anybody who you think might enjoy it. Comment. You guys see I love interacting with a lively live chat. You can become a channel member right here on YouTube or support her on Patreon, or you can send a donation in the form of a super chat or super sticker. Knock yourself out with all of that. Let's get to Mr. Who's the Boss. And that video I have not seen. I promise to God.
Surprised. Samsung has barely changed the camera hardware compared to their last phone. And yeah, they did announce some new software features that should make things better, but they do that every year. And more often than not, it does not. And so seeing that all of a sudden the skin tones look a mile better and that there is...
Yeah, in this example, they actually do. So that apparently didn't help poor SuperSaf somehow.
More detail in practically every single part of this image made me think that there is actually a fighting chance that while the iPhone 16 Pro Max did pretty conclusively beat Samsung last year with 6.5 points to 4.5.
Yeah, by the way, his point system is garbage. It includes a lot of bullshit AI stuff and things like user interface. Well, he will give Samsung the win because the display is less reflective, even though the iPhone screen is brighter. And then there are questions about like what's the battery life, which at that point you should probably include. That being said, I will just try to take the good categories and maybe by the end add them up myself, see which one is more important, because for example, like the gimmick video features, they don't matter that much to me, whether it's spatial video on the iPhone, cinematic video on both, or even stuff like slow-mo with like ultra slow-mo. I think Samsung supports some kind of 240 FPS slow-mo if I'm not mistaken. Genuinely, it's something I don't care about. I don't think any of that would ever outweigh just having good image quality, whether it's in photos or videos. So I will try to focus as little as possible on the categories that I actually deem useless here.
Samsung can come back and take that crown with force, and to find out if it does, let's see how both of these cameras can capture my dream weekend in London.
Why is everyone capturing an overcast London? Guys, oh, well, I think he's also from England.
So the second you open the camera, you'll immediately notice one of the biggest improvements that Samsung has made compared to last year. It's their camera experience is so much slicker. It looks a little less cluttered. They've trimmed some of the fat, like that god-awful AR emojis feature, which you would only...
But IG, it's hard to say what the camera experience in 2025. Like, I wouldn't like a phone that dies while I record video. Yeah, this is why I'm saying it's really hard to nail down what exactly should go into his categories. And it's not like either app is bad, right? So I just struggle when people, like, if it, for example, like Google Pixel it captures very good images. No question asked. Decent videos too. But let's say, especially with the Tensor G2 2 years ago or something like that, and you take the Photos app and suddenly it's slow half the time, especially after like 3 months of usage. There are a lot of background tasks that have accumulated on your device. You'll probably need to go into your settings app regularly to free up RAM, to free up system resources. While it might not be the fault of the camera app specifically, you would end up with a bad camera user interface or just a bad camera experience. With Samsung S23 Ultra, right, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 product, Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 product like S24 Ultra, Snapdragon 8 Elite product like the S25 Ultra, the iPhone, whether it's the 13 Pro Max, the 14 Pro Max, the 15 Pro Max, the 16 Pro Max, I would argue going back to like the 12 Pro Max and 11, like whether it's an A13, A14, A15, A16, you get it, chip, right? Never have I used a somewhat modern Samsung devices and even slightly old iPhone products and thought, oh my God, that camera is slow or unintuitive. So to me, this is really where you give like negative points if someone messes it up, but it's not something where I would say, oh, it's a full point in like a 10-point comparison.
use if you were trying to get bullied.
I feel like the right thing is to only care about the quality in the camera video and talk about the camera app, the battery, and scenes in and screens in the review. I agree for the most part. I think there could be individual scenarios where, let's say you have actually decent battery life in your smartphone, but something about the way it captures images just eats up way too much battery life. I think that could be worth mentioning. But yes, if everything else is pretty predictable, I just wouldn't focus on these hardware things at all.
And they have streamlined the settings so that you're not seeing like 50 different things at any given time. It feels like you can actually focus on what you're trying to shoot. And also, over the last few years, I've complained my fair share that you have to do too much stretching to get to these settings, which has always veered me more towards preferring the iPhone's camera app. But it looks like Samsung might actually have listened. Pretty much every single tweak
they have copied a shit ton.
can now be performed by your thumb and your thumb only. All topped off with the fact that it's now smoother to flick between the modes and zoom in and out of things, and faster in terms of the time taken to capture. Significantly faster. It does feel on first impression like Samsung finally opened their ears and in one fell swoop addressed everything we've been asking for. Now, if you compare it to the iPhone, I would still say that Apple's app is noticeably faster.
Yeah, it is. This is why I was shocked when the S24 Ultra somehow got that specific point over the 16 Pro Max because of a less reflective screen.
Smoother. To be fair, it's a lot smoother at night. Samsung still falls apart there. But
Yeah, and it does give you actually usable previews for certain things. While with Samsung, for example, with portrait modes, those previews are not that great. Night mode previews are not that great. those are actual things where the iPhone is way better.
Samsung does now feel fast enough that it's not an issue, while offering way more tweakability within.
However, by the way, there are some downgrades here versus the S24 Ultra. So obviously you can use for a smartphone, a watch, for example, to control capturing a remote image. But one advantage that Samsung has had historically was always the fact that it had well, not always, but their premium devices had a Bluetooth-enabled S Pen. And that S Pen allowed you to remote click images. Now that's gone. The S Pen has lost its Bluetooth functionality. Not only that, while you do have quick access to the camera with a double click on the power button, the iPhone does give you a dedicated hardware system to control not just your camera, but the camera app itself with camera control. You can argue if camera control is well done or not, but it's objectively something the Samsung just simply doesn't have.
This one camera app and this incredible anti-reflective display that makes interacting with it on a bright day just a complete.
iPhone is better at processing in real time, so the preview looks better on the iPhone. Yeah, and in my opinion, that makes a lot of difference between like actually usable or not.
Breeze, I think it's time to bump Samsung up from a draw in the camera experience category last year to a full-on win.
Yeah, that's like nothing was considered. Again, the anti-reflective coating was considered, but not the actual camera control button. It's insane. Like, this bias is so freaking clear, and it's not a pro-Samsung bias. It's a back and forth bias where he will sometimes want to give the iPhone the win to appease like bad Apple fanboys like me, I guess. But and then the other time he would want to appease the Samsung users, and right now it's Samsung's turn.
Now, audio is the second key thing that Samsung says they've improved, which is pretty good timing since the London Underground is about the worst place we could have picked to film a video like this. And their improvement comes in the form of audio eraser.
Yeah, I agree. If you are going to give a point there at all, it should be a draw. And in my opinion, it should not be a point at all. In my opinion, it should basically be a minus point for whatever phone you review, right? Let's say it actually does have a great camera, but for some reason its camera app is bad. Then I think you just deduct points rather than trying to say one deserves a full point over the other, even though you literally showed that the other had a noticeably faster app, especially in low light, and with much more usable previews. I'm not making up these points. We literally saw them in the video, right? This is not Apple bias. This is just me reacting to what he had shown.
After you've taken a video, you can ask AI to analyze that video for all the different types of noise within it, to then allow you to reduce the parts that you don't want to hear. So let's highlight
the iPhone gives you deep insight into
voice by turning down the rest. And we could do a very similar thing on the iPhone using Apple's audio mix feature.
Thank you.
So this is what I sounded like on the Samsung.
Okay, so this video already on the iPhone is way, way better looking. But let's see how the audio fares.
This is what it sounds like up now. It's effective, but at the same time, it's all magic. It's working in quite a simple way, which means that it does fudge the quality of my voice at the same time. And then this is what the iPhone sounds like with the same effects.
Okay, the iPhone does maintain more of the surrounding sound, but the iPhone does make his voice sound noticeably less artificial. However, what just jumps up to me is just how much better he looks in the video. Like, everything is sharper, better exposed. Usually when we are talking how the iPhone is not good at handling shadows, you can see that where the Samsung creates shadows where there shouldn't be. This is such a superior video across the board.
Not perfect, but it is a little better. And that makes sense because the iPhone has 4 microphones around its body compared to Samsung's 3, which means it does have a better understanding of what sounds are coming from which directions to be able to eliminate the ones you don't want to hear. So,
and even like small imperfections here, like the fact, well, imperfections, obviously, we are all human, but like the fact that he has some gray hair here, the fact that the iPhone can expose for that is just really good.
But things get a little better now.
Like, you can see that here, right? Some gray hair here. Now, here his beard is a little bit fuller, so you won't see the individual gray hairs as well. But the iPhone just did that better.
because I am very happy to say that video quality is now tangibly better. Samsung talks every year about how their video quality has improved, and usually it just feels like that one X who comes running back once per year promising that they've changed.
I would say the Samsung colors are better, but everything else is better on the iPhone.
This time.
It's difficult because I would give you that for the skin tone of SuperSaf, but I feel like Mrwhosetheboss does have a warmer skin tone in that regard. He's younger. He is also of a different ethnicity than SuperSaf, so I'm not trying to do like race science here. You could argue whether or not the Samsung might have had slightly like better colors if you take it like the 0 point somewhere there is a perfect neutral, and then the iPhone made it a bit too warm, Samsung a bit too cold, right? But the iPhone definitely chose the more pleasing direction here, and neither of them were far enough off that I would say that one just wins because it's more accurate. And yeah, everything else was better on the iPhone.
If we actually just pull up the Galaxy S24 Ultra for comparison.
Which, by the way, I still prefer this design. Like, I think it's more iconic, for the lack of a better word for Samsung. But I do understand why they had to move away from it at some point.
You can see slight improvements in still videos taken during the day. Things are a little bright.
By the way, here, definitely a win for Samsung for a faraway shot. This looks good.
Things are a little more detailed. You can see substantial improvement to videos taken in
that's versus the S24 Ultra. So yeah, definitely the S20. I thought that was the iPhone. I was going to give them the point.
Taken during the day. Things are a little brighter. Things are a little more detailed. You can see substantial improvement to videos taken in.
Yeah, you can see that it definitely does what the iPhone would do here, which is it does not try to brighten him up because it knows that's just not how the contrast works here. And I definitely prefer like the contrast decisions of the S25 Ultra here versus the S24 Ultra.
Middle lighting conditions.
Ducky boy, whether or not we like the S25 Ultra contrast better versus the iPhone, we'll see in more tests, I guess. But versus the S24 Ultra, that I'll definitely agree with.
Especially when you add in some movement, since the S25 Ultra can now intelligently separate.
There's also just a lot of noise in both of them, but you can see it just is faster at focusing on other stuff, adjusting color balance and white points. Yeah, this is a better video camera
the ways that it
across the
treats
board
static
in
and
the
moving
S24
objects.
Ultra.
And then in low light, you can't not see the difference, especially when
I mean, neither focused.
you look at how much less noise there is in the sky above.
But
You know what,
neither focused.
Samsung? You needed to improve video. You have improved video. This calls for a celebration.
But the iPhone still wins, right?
The S25's footage is now good enough that in most lighting conditions, I wouldn't actually say the iPhone is necessarily better. And that is a huge deal. For years, the iPhone has been the undisputed.
Yeah, there is still the point to be made that the iPhone, of course, while the Galaxy does support log, the iPhone has the far better encoder for log files with ProRes log. But this is where I would argue we should probably have a category called pro features, not just gimmicky features, and then we could. But yeah, the iPhone here looks better. So.
King of video. They had this whole extra layer of detail, even in bright lighting, that no Android has been able to match, likely due to the insane synergy that Apple gets from both being able to design their chips and also create the camera software that goes with those chips. That said, this is only a half party, because when the lighting dips, Samsung loses its clarity a little faster than Apple. Can you see how on the Apple you can see the full gradient of light, whereas on the Samsung there's kind of like this dark mush on my head? Or how in this scene, shot on the phone's ultra-wide cameras, Samsung, while no longer getting obliterated, is still just...
Which is, like, the fact that Samsung cannot win video comparisons for the ultra-wide, despite having, like, a larger sensor, a wider aperture, and I believe they actually are less ultra-wide, right? So they actually focus on a smaller area. The fact that the iPhone's ISP can overcome those differences is insane.
Just being slightly outdone with Apple being better able...
Yeah, like, this is where, like, we're talking stuff like contrast and exposure, and yeah, definitely the iPhone
to control the
wins.
bright spots, to not overexpose them. And then, as you probably expected, Samsung is still significantly behind at night, and there's a specific reason for it, but I'll get to nighttime soon. That's a separate story. For the purposes of now, just know that Samsung is getting closer than I thought they would this time, but they are not quite there.
But now it's time to get some views. So we are about to head to the perfect little spot to try and see London City from above, because that's going to be the best place to test the zoom cameras on
The
these
London
phones.
Eye?
So even though compared to the S24 Ultra, there hasn't actually been any zoom hardware upgrades, Samsung is claiming that their new software alone is going to make all the difference. Okay, so if we zoom all the way into one of these buildings on the S25 Ultra versus last gen, the further in you get, the more that you can actually notice the improvement to resolving images. By that I mean the camera isn't actually capturing any more information. It's the same camera, but
The problem is these are drawn in lines, right? Do you actually think that this is the structure of the building? Do you think it actually has this completely irregular, asymmetrical lines drawn here? This is over sharpening at, in my opinion, its worst, because it combines some actual good sharpening, which is absolutely necessary for a small sensor. You cannot do it without at least some sharpening. But this is where you just draw in lines with AI. And I'm sorry, but AI is neither good enough in general right now, and certainly not on a compressed large language model that can run on device, on a smartphone, especially on a smartphone that has quote unquote only 12 gigs of RAM. This is bad. This is made up shit.
the software just now better understands how to piece that information together into the final image. And so, does it beat the iPhone? Well, the iPhone 16 Pro Max has one telephoto camera for zoom. It's a 12 megapixel camera with a 5 times optical zoom rating, whereas the S25 Ultra has two telephoto cameras, a 10 megapixel 3 times optical
I like how he says telephoto. It sounds very, very British and very, very distinguished.
zoom camera, basically for things that aren't too far away.
By the way, look his skin tone. By the
10
way,
megapixel 3 times optical zoom camera, basically for things.
Look, this is the way he chooses to expose himself. Mrwhosetheboss, please don't expose yourself, right? But this is how he manages exposure for his professional YouTube channel with what, 20 million subscribers? I think around 20 million subscribers, right? But in comparison, look at that comparison for audio where he was on the train, right? Like you can see that, yes, while the iPhone goes warmer and brighter on his face than it would have done otherwise, but it just does his skin a much better service than this, where there is smoothing going on. I would argue here the iPhone does a little bit too much pink, but yeah, this to me is just weird. Wow, I don't know if the extra details are real, but I think it looks better. They are not real, and I guess I am a stickler for those things, but yeah, there are some algorithms here that definitely help, but some stuff is made up, and which isn't bad if it works. I would argue here it definitely works, probably works for this one, but that previous image S25 versus S24, it just didn't work for me. Let's see.
Or 5 times zoom camera for things that are. And the results are pretty much as clean cut as that. Samsung looks better at 3 times, it looks better at 5 times, and it looks better beyond 5 times. There are definitely some points where the AI processing feels a little too much. It's almost like someone took a Sharpie and started drawing on extra outlines to make the image look.
Yep. And I honestly have to say, like, is it as bad as the moon photo stuff? I would say individual decisions, yes, but not the broad image. But yes, you are getting the correct thing. It's sort of like people don't get the AI, the moon stuff. It's not entirely like, oh, it just draws the perfect moon on top of it. It does obviously get some photographic data from what it sees. But you can see here that these lines, they just don't have any detail to them. They're, you know, like that joke about African borders, right? Like that basically British and Danish and whatever other colonial powers wanted to, French, of course, colonial powers wanted to divide Africa. So they basically just took a map of Africa and they drew borders with like a ruler and a pen, right? Sometimes ignoring natural boundaries like rivers and lakes and stuff like that. Ignoring the territories of a tribe here versus a tribe there. Sometimes dividing a tribe in half, sometimes forcing encroaching onto one territory, two warring tribes, right? I feel like this is a very British thing here in that regard, to be just drawing the most clear-cut, most straight-ass line.
Look more defined than it actually is.
It actually looks like somebody drawn over the images in paint or something. Yes, I'm glad you see it, because I do not, as I said, we will actually see examples where it works to the benefit of Samsung, because sometimes a line is actually like clear and straight, and basically you don't always have the detail to know that it is, but obviously if your AI guessed that correct, then it did something good. But then it just sometimes will draw lines that never were there or were not that straight.
I'd still always choose this camera if I wanted to take long-range shots. It's the difference between having an image that does look artificially enhanced versus having an image that's practically beyond hope. And then when you want to take...
I mean, do you really care, though, about the details over there? I feel like what matters is still the broader image.
Zoomed in video, let's say you're at a concert, then it brings me great joy to say that it having better zoom hardware than Apple, combined with now better video quality than last year's Samsung, means that...
Like for example, this one, I'll absolutely give it to the Samsung. There's some over sharpening here and some stuff where it just makes up shit, but it looks better in that regard.
The S25 Ultra wins on all fronts when it comes to...
Okay, that's just wrong. So I guess night mode for him is entirely separate, because zoom shots in low light definitely are better on the iPhone, but we'll see.
Okay, 2 points to each phone right now. This feels like a pretty good time to just go right back to basics for a minute. If you strip away all of the fancy extras, then which phone on auto captures the best shots from its rear cameras? Well, last year I awarded this category to the iPhone, since it would take higher resolution photos, it would take those photos faster, and most importantly, the ultra-wide camera was just straight up 4 times the resolution of Samsung's. But you can tell Samsung has been thinking about this. The new 50-megapixel ultra-wide camera on the S25 Ultra is, I would say now, very much equivalent to the iPhone in detail. And the thing that I really appreciate is that if we flick between the ultra-wide and the main camera versions of this shot, neither phone has any color shifting now. This is incredibly subtle and yet also incredibly hard to achieve, because traditionally cameras don't have any awareness of the space that they're shooting in. All the camera knows is this scene.
Yes, I mean, there are objective like color sensors, there light sensors. The iPhone will win due to megapixels, I think. I think it should in default mode. It might be a draw, though, because he does point out how the ultra-wide just lost the advantage that it previously had on the iPhone.
Scene is really bright, for example, I'm going to fiddle some settings to make it darker. And then the second you go to a wider angle, the scene might get darker on average. And so your camera will decide to brighten it up again. And so to you, both of those...
It's funny, though, that we still have to mention that stuff, even though Apple basically kind of nailed that starting with the iPhone 11 series, but whatever.
Images will look very different to each other. You don't get that here. And now that Samsung has also brought the time taken to capture your shot way down, this no longer feels like the slower, clunkier camera that's far less likely to be ready in time. Okay, but then the two things that they haven't yet cracked are, first, resolution. While Apple can take 24 megapixel photos by default on its main camera, Samsung is still
sharper. Also just way better exposed. Like actually getting his eye color here is actually pretty great. I don't know if it does that for me, and my brown is actually brighter than his.
At 12. And while that doesn't mean that Apple's photos look close to twice as good as Samsung's, they do have the edge if you peek closely. And this isn't like a one-off. I'd say in 90...
And by the way, people also underestimate just how much detail Apple could be getting out of 24 megapixel shots with even half the sharpening that Samsung does, right? Samsung's 12 megapixel and even 50 megapixel photos are way, way over sharpened in comparison to the iPhone here. To be honest, I think something like a Xiaomi 15 are way better than the Samsung and maybe even than the iPhone. Not for detailed photography, but for example, on zoom, you will just benefit from way larger sensors. In ultra-wide, it's actually bad. I think most Chinese phones, for some reason, also ignore the ultra-wide. Like, I guess you could argue the ultra devices maybe that have full 1-inch sensors could win decisively in certain scenarios, especially with a minimal amount of processing set. There is, however, the thing to consider that usually Chinese devices right now, at least right now, so please don't take that as like a broad negative statement, they do not match color performance between each individual sensors as well as the iPhone does and the Samsung now does. So big compliment. I actually entirely agree here with Aaron, I think is his name. I'll just call him Mrwhosetheboss. That Samsung's color consistency has noticeably improved over the years. So while I'm not maybe in love with their overall color science, at least it's more in line, internally consistent, right? So Chinese phones don't do that quite perfectly. And I feel like some default decisions when it comes to skin smoothing and over sharpening, though I would argue that some of them are not as bad as Samsung. So I would probably still prefer the iPhone on average, though that is, by the way, not an excuse for Apple to not move up to like a 1 by 1.4 inch main sensor, or maybe some point even a full 1-inch sensor. Though a full 1-inch sensor does have some other issues, potentially, like edge-to-edge sharpness, because you would need to have a very large optical system around it. It might have some imperfections around the edges unless you make it really large. Plus, if you let in so much light, now you will need to make the other sensors a lot larger so they don't end up falling behind too much. So I understand why Apple has not yet gone the route, and why even some Chinese manufacturers have downgraded their sensor sizes from like 1 inches to like 1 by 1.28. Xiaomi has a better main camera, but the iPhone has better ultra wides and color stuff. In hardware, maybe I still prefer the default output of iPhones overall, but in terms of hardware, I can definitely criticize that Apple is not chasing the dragon of perfection as much as maybe some Chinese companies.
To 95% of photos taken on default settings auto, as soon as you zoom in, you will encounter some softness on Samsung where Apple is pin sharp still. And then the second part of the equation is storage. The efficiency of the iPhone's file format means that even though it's taking higher resolution shots, it's doing so while only actually consuming about 80% of the storage space of Samsung. And here's the kicker. The iPhone also, by default, within this tiny file size, is capturing live photo data. So that little bit of video just before the shot is taken. Samsung doesn't do this automatically. And if you turn it on, its file size is only going to increase further. So given that in terms of the style of the photos, it's more of a personal preference, and I wouldn't really say that one is consistently better than the other, I'm going to give the photos category.
By the way, like I want to give a compliment here where I would say the iPhone and Samsung just make very similar decisions, and that to me is a very good sign that both of them are pretty natural.
On balance.
The focus is also hard at 1 inches. Yes, absolutely. It also would have, well, the iPhone does have the 3D time of flight sensor on the back, so it actually might have the best autofocus in the phone. However, how utilizable it is at further distances is a slight question. So yeah, it would be actually very interesting to see what Apple, like I would love to see an iPhone Ultra that just for the heck of it gives you like a 1-inch main sensor, a 1 by 2-inch ultra wide, a 1 by 1.5-inch telephoto, a 1 by 2-inch selfie camera, right? All that crazy stuff.
To the iPhone. That said, it's not really very close at all after you've taken the shot. The editing suite on Samsung's phone is leagues ahead.
That is actually, okay, this is actually garbage now, because the iPhone does support photographic styles. The iPhone supports formats that are easier to edit, like better to edit, and it even has like hardware accelerators in the system for stuff like ProRes to accelerate it. ProRAW, again, is way better than Expert RAW. There are free apps that are better than either editing solutions for video. They are like, for very little money, you get just a much better photo editor and stuff like Halite on the iPhone than anything Samsung does. The fact that editing and that 2 points here, right? Samsung won 1 camera point basically, which is the zoom scenario. The iPhone won main camera. The iPhone won like what even are these categories at this point though? Like and audio, whatever this was at this point. And now he will give Samsung another point for another software thing that is happening completely after the photos. Imagine the hardware from the Xiaomi 14 Ultra and the iPhone. Yeah, that would be cool, especially if the the processor would still have to be the A18. No matter if some think that the A8 Elite might be better at gaming, it would have to have the, obviously, iOS, it would have to have the A18, and it would have to have, like, it would have to be designed from the get-go by Apple.
I'm happy to see that Apple has finally introduced Cleanup, their way to remove distractions from your photos. It does just feel like Samsung's generative edit application is quite a few steps ahead right now. You can move and resize objects, which Apple's Photos app just doesn't let you do.
Okay.
And when you try to remove things from your photos, have a look at this comparison. Same image, but can you see how Samsung really genuinely made this person in the background look like they never even existed? Whereas the iPhone's prediction of what was behind them is just not the one.
Devin is better with third-party editors. Samsung's AI editor is better. Yes, I just really hope that he doesn't have an extra category for AI, because at that point we would be left with 3 points where the camera user experience, the editor experience, and then the AI feature suite would all be separate. If those are at least 2 points, I could somewhat understand
AI
it.
editor side by side. It feels a bit like using ChatGPT 4 and then going straight back to ChatGPT 2. Plus, Samsung has Best Face, which if you do turn on that motion photo...
That feature I actually agree. That feature deserves praise. It's something that I've also praised on the Google Pixel. That I'm completely fine with. I do think that, like, saying editing and you mean AI editing rubs me the wrong way. But yeah, again, I did say I will simply not focus as much on the categories that I think are bullshit.
Feature lets you pick the best face in any given photo you've taken, quite often improving the end output. Samsung can turn a photo into a live photo with real moving elements. It can
Okay, why not capture a live photo? Why do I need a... Like, come on, you have to... Like, am I crazy? Like, why do I care about stuff like this?
remove reflections from windows, it can remove shadows from darker parts of images, and that's not even getting into the whole now upgraded image generation part of the equation. The ability to load up a photo you've taken, to ask it to make the sky a sunset, for example, to pick a style, and then sit back and let it cook. To be fair, I don't actually know when I would use this. And on a similar note, Samsung did also introduce this new way to make filters. You give...
okay, you are mentioning filters, but not photographic styles that are actually baked into an image.
the phone a photo that you like, and it then takes the color tone, the saturation, and the
Best Face is nice, but it only works on live photos. Oh, really? And it's not on by default. Well, that would make it... That's really worth calling out. I'll actually look into that maybe before the next video.
brightness of that image to apply it to other shots. It's very reminiscent of Apple's photographic styles feature, but like maybe even less useful.
Oh my god, you don't understand photographic styles, you freaking moron. Jesus, oh my god, at least you understand that it's less useful, but even more useless? Really? Photographic styles, like, how can you be in the YouTube content creation and think that having deeper access, like almost metadata control of how your image is taken, handling everything from exposure to, like, Jesus Christ, that is such a dumb freaking thing. Like, come on, Aaron, I tried to be nice, wasn't I? Like, I was like, oh, I have some disagreements, but...
Couple of gimmicks aside, though, pretty easy point to Uncle Sam in this category. Now, when Samsung announced that thanks to a new image signal processor, the
Wait,
S20
how many
point to Uncle
categories?
Sam.
Okay, there are 12 categories. So we are not even at the top 10 of like important things anymore. We just have to add and add shit. So in the end, we can give more half points and more. You also see, by the way, what he is going at with like the way he's structuring it, right? It's like Samsung wins, Apple, but Samsung again, Apple, Samsung again, right? He is trying to make this more interesting in that regard.
In this category. Now, when Samsung announced that thanks to a new image signal processor, the S25 phones will take significant...
Okay, 11... Well, that's even more stupid. You really couldn't combine two of the 11...
better selfies than the S24 phones. I didn't think that much would come of it, but it turns out that the S25 phones are finally the generation where Samsung has figured out skin tones, and selfies are the place where you notice that the most. I would say that if the previous phones got skin tones 70% right, then we're at a solid 90 right now. And that, plus the improved handling of textures, does give these photos a definitive facelift. And so compared to the iPhone, this is pretty easy. Given that I already thought the S24 Ultra took better selfies than the iPhone, the S25 Ultra is now comfortably ahead. I prefer the style, I prefer the way it makes skin look, and it's got that extra pop of color, which is nice. In most cases, it just gives scenes that ever so slight, even better than real life feeling. But occasionally it can also actually ruin it by making the image look a little artificial.
I mean, like, is that a little bit ruined in your opinion? Do you not like see that you equated between like 2 to 5% differences versus scenarios where sometimes there is a 5x difference in usability of an image?
But overall,
like, look at even those two images. Which one is even superior by default? Like, he's presenting it as like if Samsung is like the obvious winner here.
Samsung actually putting this phone in the lead right now. Well, Samsung has never been as good as...
And the problem, Ducky Boy, is I'm not even saying that he should judge the selfie camera based on that specific one shot that ruined him and his wife. I think they got married, right? She's not longer his fiance. But like, he equated basically like, oh, these images, look, Samsung better. A little bit, right? But then Samsung a lot worse. And that one was somehow like, oh, but sometimes it messes up. I'm like, what?
Apple at, though, is when you switch over to selfie video.
But this is exciting. Just have a look at this. I'm talking about the sandwich. This is the greatest sandwich I have ever tasted in my life. I had it once a couple of months ago, and all I've been thinking about is coming back and eating it for the second time. Oh, sweet mother of cheese.
Oh, please. I would actually love... I know it might be weird, but I've been watching a lot of like cooking short form videos. Please don't judge me. And I've been obsessed with like crunchy sounds, right? But here, I would actually love to hear the audio of how the Samsung captured the biting sound, because the iPhone really sounded basically perfect. And I would like to know which one got that better.
Anyway, Apple has still got video on lock. Just like with selfie photos, I prefer Samsung's style, the sharpness on faces.
I mean, no, but okay.
And the contrast.
I can see that the iPhone is a little bit pinkish here, but like it doesn't like mess up your beard and stuff like that. It doesn't give your face weird shadows. And my point with these specific tests, right, with like, oh my God, how does the crunchy sound compare between the iPhone and the Samsung when I bite into this delicious sandwich? And I feel like if you actually love what you're doing, and I'm not saying Mrwhosetheboss doesn't, but he is very busy, right? Making this video has to happen very quickly. It happens on the spot, right? But the point is, when you find things that are legitimately very interesting, I feel like you owe it to yourself as a reviewer to just test that, right? Like re-record it, get yourself an extra freaking sandwich so you can actually like make sure that, oh, I got the sound, I got the colors and everything. And it's just something that I feel like is unfortunately missing in the space. Yeah, the iPhone is very pink here. This one is very gray though, right? It does gray on his like brown tones, and it's very an unpleasant look. But yeah, the iPhone does in video a lot of what Samsung does in photos, but the iPhone does it obviously to retain greater image clarity from image to image, from frame to frame. So it's a compromise, while Samsung's decision to do that on regular photos, it's just an artistic decision.
But it is still a little grainier than Apple's footage. And the biggest reason, I think, is the lack of optical image stabilization. The iPhone's front camera has it, whereas Samsung has to rely on...
Oh, really? I forget that all the time. I always thought that it's just that the camera is wide enough that... I didn't know that.
Equivalent of it. And that's fine when it's really bright, but the dimmer it gets, the less precise that electronic stabilization becomes, and the more jittery that footage starts.
By the way, also, like I said, where you should have combined some points, I think selfie photos and selfie videos should be one category, in my opinion. Like, and in that regard, if he actually thinks Samsung takes way better selfies, which again, we've seen some very contrary things just in the SuperSaf video, but maybe for his specific skin tone, it's true. Yeah, I thought both didn't have optical image stabilization from the front camera, but as far as I know, Samsung doesn't. Let me actually go back to, oh, thank God, that wasn't like a password note or shit like that. Let me actually go back to the tech specs side that I opened in the beginning, where selfie camera, dual pixel, PDAF. I believe that's just where it uses like distance between individual pixels for optical. What does the iPhone say here? iPhone 16 Pro Max. Maybe it's just worse, but it has it? I'm honestly not sure. Oh, the iPhone. Yeah, I'm sorry. The iPhone has... well, for stabilization, I'm not actually sure, but the iPhone for... oh, yeah, the iPhone has OIS. Okay, that's actually cool. So the iPhone has OIS, and for a focus, the iPhone also has the Face ID hardware. So in that regard, the iPhone actually, as you can see, has a way smaller sensor, 1 by 3.6 inches versus Samsung's 1 by 3.2. But these other stuff are just helping along. Should make a category named social media when he judges the video inside Snapchat and stuff. Yeah, that would just be almost universally a point for iPhone. Like an iPhone SE will win sometimes at that point because it just has way better HDR integration between its own like camera pipeline and then the APIs for social media apps.
To look. So still a point to the iPhone, but it is getting closer. And there was something I was really glad to see.
So this is footage taken on both phones' Instagram cameras. So this is shot on Instagram, it's uploaded to Instagram, and then it's downloaded again. And you know what? Samsung actually looks all right. We did this exact test last year, and the footage...
Okay, the audio once again is a win for the iPhone. So I'm actually glad that he is providing that direct audio comparison. So he is giving us more data than SuperSaf just did. And that point he gave the iPhone for audio, in my opinion, is becoming more and more deserved the more videos we observe. Definitely has better video than the Samsung. No, it doesn't at this point. Yeah.
From the Samsung was absolutely butchered. So something has clearly improved here because it doesn't look like it's losing any more information than the iPhone is.
Now, this might not even affect you at all, but for me, 50% of my front camera usage is via these applications. So this feels like a big weight finally off Samsung's shoulders. Although, really weird thing that I did notice, when you compare the S25 to the S24, when things get dark, then the S25 actually looks worse. It's super smoothed out.
Yeah, that's just the point of newer algorithms. It just takes, you would need actually better hardware for a changed algorithm to be universally better. The way you achieve way better AI is, for one, you give it more data. That's the basic. You use a more advanced model. For example, you switch from a convolutional neural network to a transformer model. Though part of a transformer model is that it's more resource hungry, right? In that regard. So while I feel both companies have been greatly improving their ISP, their HDR pipelines, I don't think either one has enough to offset for now just how small certain sensors are and stuff like that. Less optimized will get better over time, but yeah, but you still want a better baseline, right? Like, for example, when you're capturing raw data, everything that matters at that point is how good your sensor and your optics are. And while sure, you could argue, well, I could use a sensor half the size, but a much better processor and things like that. Sure, but if you want to edit that, now you are in a pickle. Even Pro RAW is not as editable as Real RAW in that regard. Certainly way better than Expert RAW still, but that's a different discussion, right? So you do want those sensors to get larger, those optical systems to become more modern, the focus solutions to become faster and better,
with all face beautification off. And now, just before we start to wrap this up and to crown a winner, we have to talk special modes. These are your extra features, things like slow mode.
which will win? I actually don't know. Like, it could be a draw because the iPhone has something, has stuff that Samsung doesn't have, like spatial video, right? Like 3D stuff. And iPhone is better at cinematic video. And slow-mo is almost identical. So I believe Samsung has ultra slow-mo. Could be a draw.
Cinematic portrait mode style video and close-up macro shots.
I mean, right now, what's the point? The distribution. It's 4 for iPhone, 4 for Samsung. So we would probably want to give one a draw and then give 2 points to Samsung. That's my prediction.
Last time I awarded the win to the iPhone, partly because Apple's slow motion video just looked higher quality than Samsung's, and to be honest, I'd still say that's the case this time around. Samsung hasn't done much to remedy it. Although I do like the fact that on the S25 Ultra, you can effectively instant slow-mo any video.
That's AI, so you should have added that, like,
just by holding down on it.
Come on, like he put camera as one like camera app basically in a specific category. He put editing into a specific category, and now he includes artificial AI stuff like that slow-mo shit. That's not in camera. It's generating artificial frames, and he's including that in special modes.
Both phones are fairly comparable with cinematic mode video.
Yeah, the steady action mode on iPhone is better. Which is interesting because it is ultra wide reliant. To be quite honest, I expected Samsung to noticeably catch up here, especially with the wider aperture, not even just a larger sensor. But yeah, it seems like Apple is very good at picking those Sony sensors, which have very fast readouts, which probably is really, really good for the way Apple processes their camera stuff.
Samsung's is a little dark, but I wouldn't say actually looks any worse. What has, though, dramatically changed in Samsung's favor is macro mode. So when you go really close to an object, both of these phones will switch to their ultra-wide cameras because these cameras have shorter focusing distances, and then they will crop into that ultra-wide to both make the transition less janky and also cut off the distortion that you would usually get around the edges of an ultra-wide shot. But then, if you really think about it, that's not great because you're using a lesser camera to take the shot and you're not even getting the full picture from that lesser camera, which is pretty much why historically macro shots are not the prettiest. But since Samsung's ultra-wide camera has now just gone from 12 megapixel all the way to 50, similar to what the iPhone is now, it gives the phone way more room to retain a higher resolution.
Neither is very superior, and there is a lot of over sharpening here.
Even with that crop. I'd say it's actually the slightly more detailed macro camera now, which might have been enough for me to move
I mean, no, but
this
okay.
category up to a draw for Samsung until you also factor in action mode,
Okay.
which is what you'd use to avoid
good,
any scene.
Good. So the iPhone will win this, and then Samsung will win two of the next.
And it just feels like Apple does a better job.
Why aren't these phones using the telephoto for macros? They can, but you cannot. The stabilization becomes a little weird at that point. Also, just the way you focus from afar on something really small. The way it works with like the aperture and things like that, it's just a bit more complicated. But you couldn't do macro mode while actually like putting your telephoto on top. That its focal distance is very different. The reason why we primarily use the ultra wide for it currently is because the ultra wide is with the camera with, would it be the shortest focal length? Well, yeah, by default. So it's the easiest one to bring up close. That's what makes it macro. If you just want something micro, right? Not A, but I, then you could use the telephoto to actually zoom in. I think a lot of Chinese phones use the telephoto. They advertise it as usable, but I don't think you can bring it up that close.
That stabilization.
Yeah, you can see this is exactly what SuperSaf also showed. It just loses focus here.
Yeah, this trip to London ended up a little wetter than I was hoping. Just like most of them, to be honest.
Yep.
But let's be really honest, if you want to do stabilization phone, native the grip, tripod people better connectivity
are absolutely class on the Samsung Galaxy S25. Okay, let's make one thing very clear. Portrait mode shots are absolutely class on the Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra. I just feel like the edge detection and
the problem is, I feel like he does do that a lot, which is he will bring up stuff like, this is class, this is best, and then he will bring up two images that look almost identical.
The style in almost all lighting conditions is nicer than Apple's. Doesn't this just look great?
What? I don't get it. What's the big difference here? Like if in fact the iPhone has some more natural, I would argue, bokeh here, where that person that is a little bit close is still like on the iPhone is getting a little bit blurry, while here he is basically sharp. And then these people in the background, they're for some reason sharp on the Galaxy, which they really shouldn't be if this is to mimic like a DSLR effect. Like the iPhone has way more physically accurate bokeh here. Does he have better skin tone here? I would argue yes. You can correct that easily with photographic styles. I still have no idea why he at no point has mentioned that. But the colors look, yeah, the colors look better. I don't mind that. But again, you can probably make 80K from that sponsor. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe not for one video, but maybe for like, I don't know, like two, 3 videos.
iPhone has a sort of faintness to it that isn't doing it any favors. Now, Apple does get a slight boost when you take portraits using its main one-time zoom camera, since, as we talked about,
What?
every photo that comes out that camera.
I mean, by the way, Ducky Boy, you've said multiple times you prefer the colors on the Samsung here. This is a clear color win for the iPhone, isn't it? Like, it's warm and brown the way it's supposed to be. I would argue that's probably one of the best skin tone examples for him that we have seen in the entire video, whether it's from iPhone or from Galaxy. I didn't deny that on the previous shot, the iPhone had the worst color signs on his head, but I also pointed out you can correct it with photographic styles.
Will come out at a nice...
Really? Oh my God, he spent 600K on a cinema room, and I'll bet it get like outdated in a year and he will want something new.
crisp 24 megapixels. But then again, I think you'd be doing your portraits a disservice by taking them at 1x. Your subject is going to look way more proportionally correct if you instead shoot at 3x zoom or even 5x zoom and you take a few steps back. And in both of those
That shot looks better on the Galaxy. I'm not going to deny that.
cases, it's a Samsung win, I guess.
But again, this is easily adjustable with photographic styles. You tune contrast a tiny bit. You tune, you increase actually warmth a tiny bit. It's so easy to tune.
The other benefit of Samsung having 2 separate telephoto cameras. One thing I do have to flag though is Samsung...
Yeah, so let's see if my prediction is correct. My prediction is, and I swear to God again, I have not seen this video. My prediction is the last one will be a Samsung win because right now I believe it's a 5-5. So 5 for Samsung, 5 for iPhone.
AI processor
Why YH2 blue on the iPhone? Again, it's correctable. This is what I disagree with because the iPhone usually takes 2 warm shots. So you can correct that. Whenever it takes 2 cool shots, you can correct that. You cannot do the same on the Samsung.
can get a bit carried away. It's like so involved in every photo now that it can even end up adding in skin texture that
isn't there, yeah?
I swear doesn't even exist. And then finally,
I swear my wife doesn't have hairs on their nose. That's funny. I like it. I respect a good wife guy.
It's time to talk nighttime. So to get one thing out the way,
oh my God, the last one is nighttime. Is he gonna get? Is the iPhone actually gonna win?
Improvement on the S25 Ultra versus
because the iPhone wins in night mode. If he is fair, the iPhone must
his
win
S24
this.
Ultra are pretty undeniable. Like for example, just look at the sky in this video here. Can you see how the old Samsung is a grainy mess and the new one is at least 50%
oh my God, is
smoother?
the
Or if we
iPhone
take this
actually
photo,
gonna win like 6-5?
while the brightly lit areas look largely the same, all you have to do is to look around.
Did he get the criticism that like his back and forth is a little bit too obvious?
Them to
Yeah, by the way, Ducky Boy, that's exactly what I was pointing out. If photographic styles was very special, right, you needed to manually enable it. It ate up 50 times more data the way that ProRAW does. I would actually agree that maybe it shouldn't be that considered, but it's just so automatically integrated. I played around with it on New Year's Eve, and I took such gorgeous images, but they're of private nature. It's family stuff. I don't share too much of this stuff. Like maybe I should just ask my sister who got her 16 Pro Max and like I should ask her like fuck, can I get it for like a day when I visit you guys and I'll just drive out to freaking Munich or something like that, and just photograph the city, and I'll just adjust every time I feel like the colors are natural, and then I present that in a perfect shot-by-shot comparison to my 15 Pro Max. I just feel like that would be so freaking cool.
That like every part of the rest of the image does look better now. But here's the issue. Let's pull up the iPhone now for comparison. It feels like the primary technique that the Samsung has been taught to combat its previous graininess is to
Higher exposure, bring out the highlights,
smooth over it. And while it has absolutely gotten
smoothing and sharpening, yeah.
intelligent at doing that, and it can make lots of clips look.
And again, we see that thing. You see, it's happening on the iPhone a little bit too, but you see that there is this green tone that defines a part of the image, and Samsung adjusted its entire white balance around it. And this is not like subject really to debate. I'm not an expert here, but this is very basic stuff, right? Look at the white tone, for example, of his Hugo Boss shirt, right? It's clear that it has a little bit of an off color. It's not clearly white, as we have seen in other images. His jacket is not clearly black, as we have seen in other images. His skin tone, which instantly gives off a warm tone, a brown tone, has this green hint in it. And while I'm not the greatest at viewing colors, because I'm ever so slightly freaking colorblind, I can at least see that.
Better than they used to. By doing it, it still can't compete with the iPhone like this, whose night videography comes out clean enough in the first place that it doesn't even need that smoothing. This difference means...
Yeah, oh my god. This looks like a 2-generational difference. The fact that the sky and the water are sharper and the buildings, that's insane.
In low light, while Samsung doesn't look like it's falling apart anymore, it just looks very soft. It's not capturing...
Oh my god, if Apple actually finally does this year what we expected them to do last year, which is improve on the main sensor size, improve on the 5x telephoto, like like not even the OIS, not even the exact 5x optics, even if you keep it to f2.8 aperture, but if you just give it a 20% larger sensor, Apple will just destroy cameras that have potentially sometimes 50-60% larger sensors.
The same level
it's
of
insane.
intricacy as Apple's footage. And for the most part, but to a lesser extent, that is true for photos too. Most photos taken in the dark, whether or not the specific night mode has activated, just look
And by the way, because we have talked a lot about skin
taken...
tones today, you can see night mode has a warm tint to it. But in this case, the warm tint actually is incredibly beneficial to his skin
in the
tone.
dark, whether or not the specific night mode has activated, just looks slightly muddier on the Samsung. Like, just for reference, of the 50 or...
Yeah, you can see the texture on the shirt. You can see that basically, on the jacket, I'm sorry, basically some shit was made up. Well, the iPhone kept it smooth and detailed enough. On the face, the Samsung actually looks pretty good, but then if you look at the broader image and you see the cleaner sky on the iPhone simultaneously, the fact that the building in the background is nicer exposed simultaneously, all while there's more detail on him, that's actually pretty cool. I wonder what they will do after every camera is 48 megapixel. I don't see them having a 100 megapixel main camera for a while. Do I see them do that? The issue is that realistically, right, if Apple wanted to give you another like 4x binning, it would have to end up with like a 200 megapixel sensor, right? Like 4 times 40 is 160, 4 times 8 is 32. So you would have to have basically an 192 megapixel sensor there. If they do 3x binning on top of that, that's a little weird. So I just wonder what exactly they would do in that regard. I honestly, well, no, 3x binning, by the way, needs 9 pixels, so that doesn't work at all. Forget what I'm said. That's just stupid. Could I see Apple go 100 megapixels? It depends. I could see them do it if somebody just offers them a really good sensor for that. But I feel like Apple also has enough power with a company like Sony, for example, that they will just say, you know, whatever you're doing with the 100 megapixel sensor, we like how fast it is. We like how well it handles high dynamic range. We like how relatively cheap it is, right? How about you actually bring us that, but with the exact same sensor size and the same like pixel tech on top, but you give us actually 48 megapixels, right? Which will actually make it cheaper for you to produce. So I don't think that Sony would say no to that special order.
Also, test night photos that I took, I only found 2 that I thought Samsung did a better job with. This phone struggles enough at night that even zoom shots, you know, the single category that Samsung very conclusively wins at in most daylit scenarios, when the lights go, Apple often creeps ahead at. And so that leaves us with a score of 5.6 to the iPhone.
And several of those things for Samsung are very, very far-fetched. So it's more like a 3.75 if I'm nice. Apple like shutter speed more than megapixel. I feel like yes, absolutely. They like fast shutters. They like fast readout speeds from the sensor. They like their fast ISP to actually analyze that and combine multiple shots together. Absolutely, absolutely, 100% correct.
To be clear, the points aren't everything. Some categories do matter more than others. That said, do I think the iPhone is, on balance, the better camera between the two?
Yes.
I do, slightly. And most of it rests on the fact that while Samsung is improving their video game, they have to do it faster.
But I mean, he's saying that, but the iPhone won the main camera thing, and it won the night thing. So the only really big camera thing that it lost was the zoom, and that was specifically for good lighting conditions. And with portrait, I would argue I disagree with Aaron's opinion that the Samsung is far ahead. I think in portraits, I would largely give those phones a draw. I think the iPhone, for one, is way better at low light portraits. But even if you ignore that, I think that all his skin tone or color complaints are easily fixable with photographic styles. But hey, I think it's the first time in a while that the newest Samsung does not beat the newest iPhone. And that will leave us with stuff like battery to look at and performance, which is actually fascinating. I feel like Max Tech, right? I'm not going to watch it because I don't have time anymore. But like Max Tech came to like in their blind test to a victory for the Galaxy. But to be honest, I've been a little sick of reacting to Max Tech. I think I reacted a bit too much to them last year for a long time. So for these videos, yes, SuperSaf, Mrwhosetheboss, they are the first. But I don't react to them so much across the rest of the year. So for this, I think I'm kind of done with this. And I will just include more statements once I watch more full reviews. I don't think I will watch actually like more camera comparison. The only thing Samsung is better at is zoom, AI shit, and contrast. And I would argue the ultra wide in certain scenarios is better, though not in video and not in low light, which is really unfortunate.
Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the full review.
Yeah.
The Samsung Galaxy S.
Okay, so that was actually quite cool. We've been streaming now for almost 2.5 hours. Thank you to anyone who joined. I actually agreed with the final statement of Mrwhosetheboss here, which is actually quite delightful. I still will criticize him for including basically 2 categories that are very, very subjective. Like there's very little point to even structuring those points that way. I think in some points he didn't even bring up all the advantages of the Samsung, to be quite honest. Like I feel like the ultrawide actually did better in a few scenarios where it deserved some calling out. But yeah, I am quite happy here. Mr. George Best saying, Omar, just want to add something. Please seem to hate overprocess, but then do a 180 and praise overprocessed zoom photos. What's up with that? I thought you meant me because I was gonna like castrate you and then feed you to the dogs if you thought that I was inconsistent on that. Like I have disliked ultra processed shots ever since my iPhone 10s Max. I was one of the people who was like saying, "Oh my god, the grade on the 10s Max is unbeatable, but so much is just not great because it just looks overprocessed." Okay, why do people do that? I think there are a few explanations for that. And
The Samsung
I
Galaxy
feel like there are different over processings that people react differently to. So, oh my God, I opened the wrong video. There it is. Wait. Oh, I cannot. Jesus, YouTube.
Is now lighter. It's around 9 grams lighter compared to the iPhone.
Jesus.
To the
Oh
iPhone
my God,
16 Pro
YouTube
Max
doesn't let me open the last video because it thinks I just
Pro
finished
Max.
it.
In terms of comfortability,
God,
I
how
have to say
stupid
it's pretty
YouTube
much a
is.
draw. Now let's take a look at the
My
displays.
downloads
So the
here. I cannot click it. What the actual?
So the device sizes also reflect on the displays.
Matter more than
Thank
others.
God.
That's
So let me comment on that. He should add a pro features category with vlog recording and stuff like that. I agree. So my last comment for today is going to be on over processing and over sharpening. And why do I think some of these things are seen differently? You guys saw YouTube just that guys comes with web apps. Web apps have their own logic where they just think they just want to behave like a website. I love native apps whenever I can get it. Like I'm sure Apple could easily make an update tomorrow and have 69x zoom option. Yeah, so let me look here. For example, I actually would say here the iPhone does some over processing that is positive. So the skin tone, as I admitted, is less natural, but the brightness overall makes the image very natural. Like it's bright. Nobody in the London subway cannot see because it's so dark, right? Here you have this big shadow. So the iPhone compensating for that, maybe that's what its sensor saw, is actually good, right? Even though it's not perfect. Now, Samsung sometimes overprocessing, for example, from afar, is actually not bad. But once you force it into like 10x, which I believe it actually applies a different algorithm, if you take it at 5x, it is less sharp, like far away than if you take it at 10x, because at 10x, it tries to insert more AI shit. Here, an overprocessing that I actually liked from afar. Here, right? I think Samsung actually making this sharper contributes to the image looking very nice and even though probably, to be more precise, there's now so much fog accumulated between you, the camera, and that object that Apple's way of showing it is probably more realistic. But even I, who usually prefers more realistic images, will prefer this quote unquote over-processed, over-sharpened image. My problem really starts when the over-processing, the over-sharpening just starts to make shit up. Because yes, from afar, you might seem like, oh my God, look, it got these ladders correctly or whatever they are. But then as you zoom in, and especially if you maybe want to edit this photo somehow, you'll understand that that detail was never there. And what he did to it is entirely artificial. And this is also where our perception of what is bad or what is good, over processing, over sharpening, will vary sometimes in the same image, depending on if we look maybe at the sharpness of like the outline of the building, or again, these completely made up, somewhat vertical lines, but they're still not perfect, right? This is my point. This is why I think inconsistency is part of human nature. I don't want somebody to say, I want every photo to be perfectly natural. That wouldn't be natural for humans. Unless you want to edit that photo later the exact way you want, right? That's what raw photos are for. But if somebody says, oh, I want AI to help me, but then you somehow never have an issue when it does stuff like that, I honestly have a way worse problem with that. And the fact that Aaron just accepted this shit, that made me a bit angry, to be honest. Like I'm sure on first glance the Samsung looks better, but yeah, you can tell the Samsung over processes. And there were examples, for example, where I do believe that Samsung's more intense shadows in SuperSaf's video, for example. For example, this is over processed, but maybe we're talking just utility wise, right? I wouldn't even mind if it over sharpened the text, but obviously it doesn't have a similar algorithm for the face. But looking at it, where is it? Oh, that's just the overall comparison. That's not the specific camera comparison. Wait, why can I not click? Here, camera
the best cameras out do consider a bit of a blur on the side. Seem to be a bit more gray. You can mode a little bit more have availability.
Where is it?
Between these two camera.
Is that all video?
Especially if you look at when I tried to look at the camera first when it had me in focus. Now ultra-wide camera in low light, more pleasing image.
Okay, so here the over-processing, if Samsung actually got a pleasing shot out of this, right? I think we would all agree, but obviously the processing went wrong here. But then there was an example that I actually liked from Samsung here. Man, where was that building? He showed like one ultra-wide photo for the Galaxy where I feel like the tone was actually like really good. Or was it? Oh yeah, that's
totally
it actually.
Better.
I actually
if you
found
look
it.
at applying that to this, then it did close full with that extra beam a bit too flat.
Here, I think the fact that Samsung actually added contrast to this, while it is more fake, I do think it's a good decision. So inconsistency is part of human nature. We will all sometimes just intuitively like move towards whatever appeals to us personally. But yeah, I do genuinely prefer like a more natural image that I can better work with afterwards. But sometimes a little bit of over-processing, a little bit of even over-sharpening is not too bad. Samsung should focus on the 3x instead of the 100x gimmick. Yeah, I agree. I think Samsung should, like, honestly, with how Samsung pushed initially like 10x zoom, right? I think Samsung should unify 3x and 5x with one variable zoom system, right? The way that Sony does it, but Sony messes up everything else. So Sony should just sell everything they have except for PlayStation and just let more capable companies deal with stuff like that. Yeah, but that's about it for today's guys. Sorry, it's very late. It's now after basically 0 o'clock. So we've been streaming for 2.5 hours. Thank you so much to anyone who joined. Thank you so much to all the people who chatted, who gave me their opinions. Last shout out to subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it out to anybody who you think might enjoy it. Comment please afterwards, not just while I'm live, but it helps the algorithm if you comment afterwards. Just write 2-3 nice words. It all helps. Right, you can become a supporter right here on YouTube, channel member like Angelica, Max, Maximus, and Steve, who are all MarkTech Pro Max supporters. Whenever you catch me live, you can leave a super chat or a super sticker as a small donation. It all gets reinvested into my time and the channel in general, new equipment, whatever, faster internet, all that jazz. And you can also become a supporter over on Patreon. Link for that is in the description of this channel. Thank you so much for making this actually a very fun and enjoyable experience for me. I hope you have a nice start into your week. Love you all, and I'll see you soon, and we'll react to full-on reviews and more detailed comparisons between stuff like displays, batteries, processors on the Galaxy S25 Ultra versus the 16 Pro Max, maybe some stuff versus the S24 Ultra, especially with stuff like the S Pen being degraded, maybe some comparisons to Chinese flagships. I'll see whenever I can find time. Most likely not on Tuesday. Again, that's when I have plans with friends. But either tomorrow or on Wednesday, I should have a new stream for you. So thank you so much for enabling this hobby for me. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed yourself. As always, let me know what you would like to see me cover next. And this is Mark Tech, tuning out.